Coming up next, The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy. Every Thursday from 4 p.m, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
People are struggling to have conversations and connect with others that they don't completely agree with on every topic. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we need to try and solve, is how after all this division and after all this separation do we end up bringing people together again, and what does unity really look like?
New Zealand faces some pretty big issues. First one is COVID and the aftermath. There's no getting away from that. Second is racial division. It's been ginned up and it's dangerous. Another issue that maybe people haven't got their head around yet is digital currency. What form does that take? Is it programmable? Will it be used to manipulate behaviour and patterns of behaviour? Those questions need to be asked and answered.
How can you have fair, open, democratic government by people who are appointed? It's a ridiculous idea. And if that idea is taken to its zenith, then this country is in real trouble, because democracy, one person, one vote, where every vote is of equal value, has got to be the foundation of a modern New Zealand.
What's true, what's not true, how our kids are to be educated. And, I have a great fear for the future. I think we know from history where this could end up.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Welcome to The Crunch on Reality Check Radio. I'm your host, Cam Slater, and this is the place we crunch the political issues and cut through the politician's spin. We've got something a little different ahead of you for this week. My first guest this afternoon is Gary Moller. Yes, he's back. We touched briefly on stroke recovery in my last interview, and so he suggested he come back on the show to discuss this in more detail. Of course, I agreed, because I want to find out what else I can do to recover from my stroke. Then I'll be talking with award-winning Australian foreign correspondent and fellow Kaiviti, which means Fiji-born, Graham Davis, about what on earth is going on inside Fijian politics. He's a former insider in the Bainimarama government who then campaigned to oust them. But he's dissatisfied with the carry-on in Fiji, so this should be a very interesting discussion. We'll dip into the mailbag, of course, and I love this part of the show. Don't forget to send comments to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Gary Moller has been on the show before, and my comments about my stroke led him to wanting a more in-depth discussion on strokes and how to prevent them and how to fix the damage. He's the expert. I know only too well, though, what it all entails, so this is going to be very educational, especially for me. He joins me now. Gary Moller, welcome back to The Crunch. Now, you made the suggestion after my last interview that we have a chat about stroke prevention and recovery. And yeah, I thought that was a fantastic idea to get you back on the show about that, because you know a lot about it from a technical and medical perspective, and I know a lot about it from personal experience. So yeah, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you very much. And it is a fascinating subject, and it's of increasing importance, not just because we have an aging population, but we have this so-called vaccine, which is undoubtedly causing an epidemic of stroke and similar health issues. So it's very timely, very important that we do cover this.
Yeah. And, you know, when I had my stroke, I was 49 at the time, 3 days before my 50th birthday. And the first thing I did, after I spent 2 days on my back trying to stay alive, was to start looking into how do you fix this? Because I wasn't getting any answers from anybody, and those were the answers I really wanted. And, you know, I went to the Stroke Foundation website, and it just made me despondent. It was kind of like they were telling me you're going to have a lifetime as a cripple, and I wasn't prepared to accept that. So I started doing my own research, which led me on a fascinating journey. But we just touched on that in my last interview with you, and I think your suggestion to cover this in more depth and talk about some other techniques and things that I experienced might be really helpful to some of our listeners. And, you know, particularly Mike from Foxton, who after that last interview shared with us his experience of a stroke. So let's just get into this. There's lots to cover.
Well, as a little background first, I'm not a medical person, but I do have training in through the Otago Medical School in rehabilitation and another postgraduate qualification in sports medicine. And it was, in fact, in 1976 that I first started working full-time in Dunedin Hospital in the area of stroke rehabilitation. That's in the physical recovery exercise and so on, which we'll touch on shortly. That culminated in my receiving a scholarship to go to Sweden to study Sweden's sports medicine and rehabilitation programs by way of a small grant from the Federation of Sports Medicine and a letter of introduction, which opened many doors. In fact, it opened every door for me while I was over there. And it absolutely blew my mind and also confirmed to me the importance of physical rehabilitation for people who have suffered stroke. Now, one of the points about stroke is that back in the 1970s, we didn't have these amazing clot-busting drugs and other medications or methods of suctioning out a blood clot, thus rapidly restoring circulation. So back in those days, when somebody suffered a stroke, it was devastating.
Yeah, I know all about that.
Incredibly devastating. Whereas nowadays, a remarkable and very pleasing number of people do have what appears to be almost full recovery. But back in those days, the damage was massive compared to what we typically get today.
Now, however, I wasn't able to have those drugs, right? Because they couldn't tell. They couldn't tell when I had the stroke. So, you know, it could have happened half an hour before I woke up. It could have happened hours before I woke. So I wasn't given any of those drugs. My recovery from the stroke was sheer will and determination and, physical activity and, the care of two brilliant physiotherapists.
Yes. So you've done incredibly well, Cam, and congratulations.
Well,
good on you.
It's still improving. That's the thing. I was told by the neurosurgeon in the hospital that I would never use my right arm again. And I said, never sounds like a long time. He said, it means never. And he said that I might get some small improvements for about 3 months, and then that would be about it. Well, my right arm and hand has never stopped improving. It's just continued on and on and on. And I put that down to the fact that I didn't wait for the state to fix me. Just to give you an example, you studied occupational therapy and all of that sort of stuff. It took 9 weeks for an occupational therapist to visit. 9 weeks. I'd already been to physio every day for 9 weeks, 7 days a week. By the time the occupational therapist came around and gave me all these forms that was going to teach me how to deal with my life in a limited way, I'd already passed all of the milestones that they were expecting to see at 3 months. And that's when I just said to them, look, you go and help somebody else. I'll look after myself. And I sent that was the last time I saw the occupational therapist. So, if you, and this is the thing that I caution people, Gary, I really do. If you are expecting the state to send somebody to help you after a stroke, you are sorely mistaken. And you are just letting yourself become a cripple. And it really is up to you. It's not up to anybody else to do that. And because what people don't realize, there's no help for stroke victims. There's no ACC. The only way you get ACC for stroke is if it happened as a result and can be directly attributed to an accident or a medical misadventure. Otherwise, you're on your own. And it's a glaring hole that is in the ACC system. They give out support for all sorts of injuries, but not for stroke. People with stroke victims are often like that for life because they've had no help. You've got to help yourself.
Well, just on that, Cam, just to get it out of the way, if a person has any kind of heart condition and is not cautioned about the risks of suffering a blood clot, which could lead to a stroke, and they have the mRNA jab for COVID, and then consequently suffer a stroke, they can claim accident compensation.
They'll probably have to fight for it, though.
They'll have to fight for it, and I'm in the process of just writing an article about how to file a claim for such injuries with ACC. The reason I'm in Wellington is because when I finished that study tour of Sweden, I was then recruited by ACC to set up their injury prevention and rehabilitation programs for sport and recreation injuries. So I had that founding job, which was absolutely amazing. So I do have some familiarity with ACC. Unfortunately, ACC is no longer rehabilitation oriented. It is file closure oriented. But that aside, if you weren't given the right cautions about the risks of taking that vaccine and you suffer an injury, then you are eligible for ACC. But bear in mind that it is a bit of a tedious process because ACC will dispute your claim every step of the way unless it is really obvious. And it's unlikely that your doctor will support you because it is the poison chalice for their career to suggest that there may be a connection with a vaccine. Yes, if they indicate even the slightest doubt or promote the slightest hint of vaccine hesitancy, their careers as a doctor may be over.
I mean,
so you have to fight for your own.
Exactly, that's exactly what I was saying. You have to do it yourself. And don't wait for you to get approval from ACC. If you have the means, and I was lucky, right? I had the means to be able to fund it myself. I had private insurance and, I'd suffered, the neurosurgeon signed a document, said I'd suffered catastrophic loss of a limb. So, I had a payout from my private insurance and I also had income protection insurance. I plowed all of that into my recovery, 100%. Didn't spend it on anything else other than 2 physiotherapists and getting moving as soon as I could, because you'll know from your background in occupational therapy, and I'll say it in simple terms, the more you move, the more you can move.
Yes, rehabilitation, not occupational therapy. However, I worked alongside occupational therapists as part of a team. Now, one of the things that has happened, Cam, and I go right back to the 1970s, and in fact, I can go right back to 1972. Think of stroke as being cardiovascular. It's a cardiovascular accident, and I first began working with people with heart disease, cardiovascular disease, in 1972. So it's a long period of time. So there's a lot of experience there. And one of the things that has actually really dismayed me is that the physical rehabilitation for stroke is today, it's an embarrassment compared to what was provided in the hospitals in the 1970s. There have been a number of reasons. One of them is the improvements in medical procedures, which I'm not an expert in, but the clot-busting drugs and surgery, those have certainly changed things. But what it's allowed the health system to do is to cut back on the physical rehabilitation services like the mat work, the physio and the occupational therapies, the hydrotherapy, all of the hydrotherapy pools and all of the hospitals have, as far as I know, the whole lot have been closed now. So that has been lost.
That's
so we've lost all of those.
I mean, that's just dreadful.
Yeah. Well, what it means is that, it doesn't really matter for the majority of stroke patients, but there's that 10% who, and you can put yourself in that category of that 10% who suffer a devastating injury. And they are the ones who really do need every resource thrown at them and over a long period of time.
See, it's interesting you call it a cardiovascular illness because that may be the cause of it, but the actual effect of it is a brain injury.
Yes.
And in my case, it was in the front cortex, left-hand side, 2 centimeters across. That's huge. That's large. Like that. It literally, part of my brain died. And that's what I learned when I started researching how do I fix this. And the 2 physiotherapists were really great. They said, look, Cam, it's going to require thousands and thousands of repetitions of very simple tasks and little tricks as well, like using mirrors and stuff like that to trick your hand into thinking it's working and all of that to train the brain, because that's what people forget. Like I can't remember the number of people over the last 5 years saying, oh, is it like a heart attack? Well, it's nothing like a heart attack, right? It's a brain injury. It's a trauma to your brain. Part of your brain's died. It's like someone hit you with a hammer. And getting that through to people has been really difficult. And, I talking with one physiotherapist, she said she never dealt with a stroke patient before and refused to, point blank when asked to treat me. And it was my lawyer that said, no, you need to treat him. And you can learn this and this will be great and da-da-da-da-da. And we went on from there. But Pilates and all of those things that were associated with that helped me get strength in the rest of my body, which helped the arm build up. But, I think it's really important. It is a brain injury. For the first 2 years, I had to have a rest every afternoon, 2 or 3 hours, just exhausted doing simple things.
Yes. Yes, alongside stroke patients, and typically there were 3 causes that I'm not a medical expert, but a blood clot, which may form elsewhere, which finds its way into the brain and causes a blockage, or else a burst blood vessel, which may occur from, say, high blood pressure, or a tumor. Pressing on and constricting blood flow. So there are those. And then there is pretty much indistinguishable people who get a whack to the head. So young men who get punched or fall off their motorbikes, that sort of thing. And basically the therapy is very similar, if not identical.
Yeah.
So in the end, the brain doesn't really care how the injury happened. But it is that disruption to the brain and depending on what part of the brain, the degree of disability.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. The brain's amazing in how it can repair itself. And I guess that was what I learned very quickly. What are the things that are going to help repair the brain and that injury that the stroke has caused?
Yeah.
So let's go into that a little bit.
So the first thing is that if you or somebody suspects they are suffering any kind of stroke, don't mess around. time is of the essence, and the first thing to do is to call an ambulance. Don't get in a car and go down to A&E, okay? Otherwise, you might end up in the queue. The best thing to do is call an ambulance and basically bypass those queues. Don't leave anything to chance. That's the first thing. And then you're essentially in the hands of expert medical help, hopefully.
That's exactly what I did, right? I followed the FAST rules, right? Check to see that your face is your face drooping, that's the F. Is there any arm weakness? That's the A. Do you have trouble speaking? That's a speech difficulty. And then take action and call 111. I did all of that because I'd had a scare 2 years before. So I knew that. Yeah. And that was what happened. I woke up, couldn't walk properly, couldn't see in the mirror that I had my face drooping, couldn't use my arm. Next thing I did is pick up the phone and dial 111. The ambulance was there in 15 minutes.
Great. I'll tell you a funny story, okay, when I was working for accident compensation. So anyway, my boss, he was in the bathroom. I went into the bathroom and I saw him, and the side of his face was drooping, and he was speaking sort of like, he was smiling at me, but he was sort of slurring his words, and I went into a panic. I thought the guy was having a stroke. And he went along with it. He was a bit of a mischievous guy. And it turned out that he had just come back from the dentist.
Yeah, I mean,
but anyway, I've never forgotten that because I went into panic mode. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, Bell's palsy has very similar superficial appearance, especially around the face drooping.
Yes.
It's when you can lift your arms above your head and everything, then you know it's not Bell. You know it's not a stroke. But
now, if the world was perfect, here's what I'd also be doing, right? Hey, as soon as somebody has suffered a stroke, one of the things, as soon as it is practical, is to start flooding the body with antioxidants.
Yep.
Basically, food substances that protect cells from the oxidative stress of toxins that are released during whenever there's tissue damage.
Yep.
The cells that survive are stressed by the toxins that are being released from the damage, plus the lack of nutrients and oxygen due to the lack of blood flow. So it's really important in the ideal world, but it's impractical, is to flood the body with antioxidants. So there is actually a really good argument for all of us to have a diet that is rich in antioxidants, whether we have a stroke or not, because it's just so good for us from
So what are those, Gary? In plain English.
Well, brightly coloured fruit and vegetables. So any plant that has colour that is in the warm spectrum of the visible light. So red, orange, yellow, green. Okay. Right. And then you move into the blues, indigo, violets, which are so the deeper the red. So think of blackcurrant, which is probably just about the most potent of the antioxidants berries. It is so dark red that it looks black. Think of turmeric. Turmeric is the most yellow of the yellow. Yeah. If you think of paprika, it is the reddest of red. It's scarlet red. And in nature, colour denotes the degree of health. And it's those warm colours, red, orange, yellow, green. And as you move further over into the blue spectrum, you move into the less healthy or the unhealthy ones.
So in order
that's a good rule of thumb.
Yep. So in order to prevent, to give your body the best chance to fight off a stroke, or to actually give your body the chance to regenerate cells, antioxidants or foods high in antioxidants.
Yes.
These are things that contain vitamin C.
Yes.
What other vitamins are we looking at here as well?
Well, all of the vitamins, but we must also not overlook the importance of the fat-soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, E, and K. And typically as we get older, as we become weight conscious and heart healthy conscious and so on, we are encouraged to reduce our fats and oils in our diet. And by default, For example, if you move from silver top milk to yellow top milk or green top milk or blue top milk, you are by default reducing the availability of fat-soluble vitamins. And they are absolutely important, essential for neural health. There's more, like amino acids such as taurine, acetyl
Red Bull.
Not Red Bull. No.
Red Bull's got taurine in it.
Oh, it's got a bit of taurine in it, along with some SHIT.
Here's the thing, though. One thing that I found too is that it's a very large percentage. Something like around between 85 and 95% of people who have strokes have very low potassium. And that was the case with me. Potassium, and potassium's really tricky, right? Because there's a happy medium that your body will accept. It has, I don't know the correct term, you can correct me. Is it millimoles or something like that? The measurement is between 3.5 and 5.5 per litre of blood. And once you go under 3.5, then you're at risk of death. And once you go over 5.5, you're at risk of death. There's the reason why you can't buy potassium supplements anywhere, right? You have to have them prescribed. So when I went into the hospital, they said, "Oh, we're surprised you're still alive." Why is that? Because your potassium's 1.3, right? That's how low it was. And this is one thing that I've always struggled with since my stroke, is keeping my potassium levels between 3.5 and 5.5. And, people will facetiously say to me, "Oh, just eat more bananas." Well, I don't have a banana boat. Right? No, I just don't have a banana boat, because that's how many bananas I'd have to eat to keep my potassium in that level. And so I have to take these supplements. And so I find that annoying, and I haven't yet cracked that, but neither is an endocrinologist or any other specialist. So let me ask you. Could look at?
Oh, absolutely. Let me first of all ask you this, Cam. Has anybody suggested why your potassium was low in the first place?
Not a single person. Okay. I've been to every specialist known to man.
Okay, well,
I don't think they know.
Well, there are possibilities. Yeah. Now, first of all, everything in the universe is yin-yang, black-white, hot-cold, positive, negative, male, female, liberal, conservative. You cannot have night without day.
There's always balance, yep.
Everything must be in balance, and it's opposing forces. So when you look at potassium has a variety of functions. Now, from a cardiovascular point of view, potassium is the brake. So if you think of yourself as a motor vehicle wanting to travel at 80 to 100 kilometres an hour down the highway, nice and steady, you have a combination of an accelerator and a brake, and they must be well serviced and in good condition, right? Yep. You don't want to be going down the motorway without a brake. No. And think of potassium as being the brake for your cardiovascular system. It calms and quietens down your heart. It dilates and opens up blood vessels. It creates tissue, blood vessel flaccidity. Okay? Yep. Whereas sodium is the accelerator for your cardiovascular system.
Yep.
Sodium works with potassium. Mm-hmm. And when you're going down the motorway, you want to have a balance between sodium and potassium. So if there is an excess of sodium relative to potassium, you may end up either going too fast or you do not have any brakes, okay, which means you're a hazard, not only to yourself, but people around you. So think of also that sodium is pro-inflammatory. Potassium has the opposite effect, and you need a balance again between the two. So now there are things in your body which can, again, think of the yin-yang, black-white, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what acts as a antagonist or a suppressor of potassium? Now, it can be, for example, an excess of circulating calcium. Calcium is a direct antagonist to potassium. So if calcium in circulation is too high, then it may suppress potassium. Okay. The other is if you have an excess of copper. And that can be the consequence, for example, of having had glandular fever at some stage in your life, which alters the way the liver operates,
Right.
and the regulation of copper. So if copper goes up, potassium will tend to go down.
Well, I have had glandular fever sometime in the past.
Well,
So,
yes.
so you're the first person to suggest that.
Well, it's one of the most common. You will see. You just need. I started doing my doctorate on the use of head tissue mineral analysis for detecting the long-term consequences or effects of glandular fever. And I didn't complete it because it was going to take me too long. I was going to be an old man, which I didn't want to be. And my professor, who it turned out had had glandular fever himself, which is one reason why I was so interested in what I was doing, he said to me, "Gary, you already know more than anybody else, so just go and do it." And I said, "Yeah, I don't need my ego to be stroked. I'll just get on with it." Now,
so this is really interesting, though, Gary, because I get phone calls from people all the time that know that I've had a stroke, know that I recovered, know all of this stuff, and they say to me, uncle such and such has had a stroke, or my friend's had a stroke. What do you suggest? And I said, the first thing to do is get their potassium checked. Because, and every single time, right, they've come back and said, wow, it was really low. And I said, yep. And what they do in the hospital, and I know this because they did it to me, is they pump potassium into your arm. And I had a bag of this viscous burning fluid pumped into my arm.
Yeah,
it just felt like liquid fire being, it was one of the most painful things that I had to experience. But then they forget about that. Every other test you do from then on, they go, oh, look, your potassium's okay. And then 6 months down the track or a year down the track, because they haven't fixed the cause of the problem, or they don't even know what the cause of the problem is, then you tip over again because your potassium's gone down, right? And nobody ever said, if you keep your potassium between 3.5 and 5.5, your risk of stroke is significantly reduced. And I cannot get this through to people anywhere, and it's hard. They go, oh, eat bananas. For people like me, it's just never going to get there eating bananas.
Well, I don't think bananas are going to cut it anyway. And you may inadvertently be giving yourself a sugar hit. And that's not necessarily that healthy over the long term. And I haven't been able to demonstrate through testing that eating bananas significantly alters potassium retention in the body. The other thing, what we need to be looking for always is asking, well, what's the root cause? And you keep going down and down and down until you get down to the atoms. It's quite fascinating. So one of the other things to just bear in mind with potassium is potassium and sodium are regulated by the adrenal glands.
Right.
So when we're looking for patterns of whether somebody is not handling stress well or under too much stress, is on a head tissue mineral analysis, we will see an elevation of sodium and hopefully potassium. When sodium goes up, you want potassium to follow because they're like husband and wife, or I was saying, the better analogy is accelerator and brake because of the effect they have on the heart and circulation. So when the accelerator, you don't want to have the accelerator pushed to the floorboards without the brake being able to counter it so that you don't end up crashing at high speed when you hit the first corner.
Well, maybe I need to send you some here.
Yeah, well, we certainly can do that. And it would be fascinating because we may pick up the effects of having had glandular fever, possibly even as a child.
It was in my early 20s.
Yeah, it's called the kissing disease, by the way, Cameron.
Yeah, I wasn't kissing anybody back then.
Well, look, you just have to be having late nights, drinking too much, and people yelling in your ear and that sort of thing to get exposed to this. And look, all of us end up getting the Epstein-Barr virus, which causes glandular fever, but not all of us get the full-blown symptoms of this viral infection. And and it's young people who get run down, eating poor diets, not getting adequate sleep, who are at greatest risk. The other group is young boys and girls when they enter puberty. That's when they often get smashed. Now,
Okay, well, this is really interesting. I'm going to make some notes on this, and we'll talk offline about it, because I really want to get this solved. But if I can solve it, then I'm pretty sure it's going to help, multitude other people who have experienced strokes and that have got similar potassium issues.
Well, the other factor that must be borne in mind, there's a couple here, is zinc intake. First of all, there wouldn't be a single Kiwi that isn't zinc deficient. However, if you were to give somebody large doses of zinc as a supplement, zinc, again, is an antagonist of potassium. So this is all about nutrient balancing. You've got to be very careful that you don't just sort of say, you got to take zinc, you got to take this, you got to take that.
So what's a large dose of zinc then? What would you classify a large dose of zinc?
No, the first thing I do, Cameron, is test the person and determine their zinc levels and their levels of things like copper, calcium, magnesium, and so on, manganese, iron, etc., selenium. You've got to know all of those, and nothing ever works on its own. They all work synergistically and antagonistically, and that's where the testing is so important. My main role nowadays is testing. I do nutrient testing. And look, the reason why I'm a multiple world champion at 70 years of age is because I test myself and then I prescribe accordingly. And that's the way that I get. It's not because I've got some, genetic attributes or anything like that. I do it because I keep myself healthy, and I do it basically through testing, then prescribing. Cameron, you wouldn't run a business without a set of accounts, would you?
No.
You've got to know what your profit and loss is. You've got to know what your stock is, and what the turnover is. And the other thing is you've got to know what the threats are. And in the case of a human being, it's like, Cameron, have you been eating fish? Like, have you got mercury in your system from eating a bit too much tuna or something?
Yep.
Now, that could be, you've got to know all of this before you can figure out what is the root cause of why did this health-conscious bloke wake up suffering from a stroke.
Yeah, I wasn't health-conscious back then, to be fair. I am now, though.
You can see I'm grinning while I was saying
of course. You look a whole lot better than me at 70 than I do at 55, let me tell you.
I've done, basically, I work on an investment of being 20 years ahead of disease. Now, by the way, my mother died a horrible disease from a combination of cancer plus a stroke. Okay, it was her children are still traumatized, even though it's many years ago. My father dropped dead on his last run, from a massive stroke. But it doesn't worry me at all, because what I'm doing is I'm constantly trying to identify the things that are coming at me, and I take remedial action so that I stay 20 years ahead.
See, that's what worked. The benefit, I guess, for me of the stroke is that I want to learn these things. I want to know these things, to avoid having another stroke. Now, I've just passed the 5-year threshold. So the risk of stroke is significantly reduced now for me because I've passed that 5-year threshold. But I want to fix the potassium. I want to fix these things, but I want to share the information that I gather with other people so they don't have to go through what I went through.
Yes.
Because not everyone can do what I did either. That's the other thing. And I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but I'm a little bit dogmatic and I'm a little bit self-centered. And so I just focused on myself to get better. Now, I'm not 100%, but I'm a whole lot better than plenty of the other people that were in the hospital at the same time as I was. So that's why talking with you, understanding these nutrients, that will prevent other people getting strokes if we can get this message out there, because prevention is a whole lot better than trying to fix what happened after the stroke.
Yes. Well, let's do this in stages. One of the things that you could consider doing is doing some testing, and then we could even do a review in a future program. Okay?
Yeah.
That could be quite fascinating.
So I'll definitely be looking at that.
Yeah.
And what people can do, so we've covered antioxidants. People need to look at getting those antioxidants, and that's how we diverted into potassium. But look at the antioxidants.
Yes.
Next thing would be to look at making sure that all the other nutrients outside of antioxidants are in balance, and people should be looking at that, and they can do that. How can they do that? Is it through diet, or is it through supplements, or a combination?
Yes, so there's this the acute stage of healing, which is more or less the first 3 weeks or so, where really all that person needs to do is to rest, and they should be eating good food. However, the hospital system works against us on that one. First of all, there is a disdain of nutritional supplementation, which I think is very well justified. Particularly, one of the things that happens when somebody suffered a major trauma, such as a stroke, is they suffer a loss of appetite. Okay, so that's why in a hospital, even if you serve cordon bleu meals, the patients will still go for the ice cream and jelly. Yeah. Okay, and that's because during the process of healing, there is a massive increase in the need for zinc, and zinc regulates. Because I went around the ward stealing the ice cream from the fridges.
I found out where they were kept on the floor, and I was stealing the ice cream because they would only give me one at a time, and I wanted more than that. And I didn't know why it was I wanted more than that, but I did. Well, it's rather interesting that zinc regulates taste and smell, and zinc is also needed acutely for tissue healing. So when zinc, which is already in short supply, is diverted for tissue healing, there is a loss of taste and smell, and in particular, a distortion that creates an abhorrence of basically meat, eggs, fried foods, barbecue, that kind of thing. Right. So that's another subject that we could touch on, is the way that nutrients affect behaviour, taste, smell, etc. But you've mentioned several times now deficiencies in nutrients. You've mentioned zinc. You've mentioned selenium. Iodine's also deficient amongst Kiwis, isn't it? Yes. And and that's because basically processed foods, or foods that are grown industrially, tend to be depleted in these trace nutrients, and also the foods in our bread for their sugar or calorie content more than their trace nutrient content. And that also applies, by the way, to organic foods. They're not necessarily more nutritious, though they should be. It depends on what the plant was fed. You see, you are what you eat, and you need to go right down to what is actually on the soil. And if what is mostly placed on the soil is in nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and a bit of lime, well, guess what? That's what you're getting. Okay, but what about all the other trace nutrients that we've talked about, like selenium, iodine, zinc, manganese, etc., etc.? There's many. The other thing is that it's all about balance. You see, if one may have an adequate intake of, say, selenium or zinc, but if there is an excess of copper, or on the other hand, if somebody is taking too much vitamin C and they already have low levels of copper, they're going to make things worse. And that will bring on, for example, inflammatory arthritis. So some people who are listening will know that if they take supplementary vitamin C, they get aching joints. Their knuckles will hurt. Well, that can be an indication of the suppressing effect of vitamin C on on copper. And so you get this complication. Wow. So the first thing always is you test, then you prescribe, because who says somebody needs a whole lot of vitamin C? Okay. Well, if it's like I was saying, you wouldn't run a business without a set of accounts. So let's do some accounting for a person's body, then decide what's best for them. And that's how you take out the guessing.
Now, the problem with the hospital is that the food that is served tends to be absolute crap. Okay, it's terrible. Yeah. It's got no nutrient value whatsoever. I've written a number of articles about this whole business of, for example, if you think of what makes up a beautiful, healthy brain, the nutrients, right? Straight away, the simple fact that your brain is about 60% fat and oil.
Yeah.
If you're eating fat-free ice cream and a bit of jelly,
couldn't think
how
of
are you going to build a
worse.
brain? Where are you going to make a brain from? You know, you can't do it. So straight away, you're compromising healing. And so that's where the hospital meals, even where they say it's healthy, you know, if you look at that little bit of those peas and a bit of bean and, you know, a bit of mashed potato, and there might be a bit of steak or something, you know.
Anything that looks sad like that is not going to be nutritional, right?
Well, yeah, and, you know, okay, a bit of salad and that, but if you actually look at it and you say how many milligrams of you know, B vitamin, you know, folate and this and that, and how much B12 and how many grams of protein are there. I'll tell you what, if somebody stays in hospital for long enough, they will get malnutrition. They'll suffer malnutrition. Yeah, they don't heal.
Might get sicker. Yeah.
Yeah, they won't heal. And unfortunately, because of the way that allopathic medicine operates, is that there's a drug for every condition. Righto, yeah. But what we should be doing first and foremost, and look, our farmers and that know better, okay, is that if you want healthy animals that are disease resistant, that you feed them good food. You know, you make sure that the hay's good, you know, fresh and nutrient dense. If you don't, you get poor production, and the same applies to human beings. We're no different. So this is where supplementation can be important, and even like giving somebody a super smoothie, a whey protein smoothie with nutrients. Now, when it comes to like stroke, I'd like listeners to get into Google. Google's the best search engine for this, even if you don't like Google. Yeah. Go into Google and type in neuroregeneration.
Yep.
And taurine, Taurine, for example, yep. Or neuroregeneration and acetyl-L-carnitine,
yep.
Or neuroregeneration and N-acetylcysteine, NAC for short. Google will do that search for you. And just have a look. You might need to go down to get past some of the propaganda, the naysaying, and so on.
Look on the third page. Look on the third page.
Yes, it will blow you away. Now, by the way, taurine, how did taurine get its name, Cameron? Come on, you tell me. Mate.
From bull semen.
Well, I haven't. Well, taurine means bull, yes. Yep. And I don't know how they came up with this, but when they isolated this amino acid, I doubt whether they knew the health benefits of it, but what it does, it gives you the strength of a bull.
Yeah.
Okay, they even put it in red bull for some reason.
That's right.
But what it does, it strengthens the cardiovascular system. It plays a role in neuroregeneration, righto? It's all about supplying the basic building blocks so that those amazing artisans that are going to regenerate and rebuild that brain have some good quality materials to work from.
Well, that's how I got onto nicotine. That's how I got, because I did similar Google searches, you know, neuroplasticity, because I was told by the neurosurgeon, well, you know, you've had a stroke because your blood pressure was up, and then you had a lack of neuroplasticity, which created brittleness, and basically you've blown a pipe, you know, in your brain. That's what he told me. So I Googled neuroplasticity. How do you improve neuroplasticity after a stroke? And I found study after study after study, you know, that was all on, you know, government websites in the United States, like the NIH, et cetera, that talked about nicotine and how that Yeah, I said, right, this is me then. I'm into that. so that's how I started smoking cigars. We're going to take a short break now and get back to this riveting discussion shortly.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
And we're back with Gary Moller discussing strokes, their prevention, and how to remedy the damage of strokes.
So nicotine and caffeine, by the way, have similar neuroprotective effects and may have a role in neuroregeneration.
Yep.
However, they're not nutrients. So let's think of a pyramid, a hierarchical pyramid.
Yes.
And at the bottom, you have your base nutrients, including minerals, vitamins, proteins, essential fatty acids, and so on. And then as you move up, you will add in more strategies. And that could include experimenting with nicotine and caffeine. Small doses.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. It's like adding salt into the broth, just for taste. You're not pouring the whole thing in.
So if you've got a lousy diet, then smoking a cigar, I wouldn't recommend it for a minute. Okay, I would first and foremost say you've got to clean your diet up and your lifestyle and so on. So that would be, and identifying, for example, if there are toxins like, let's take another example, okay? Cameron, you could have bathed in an arsenic-laced geothermal hot pool in Tucano.
Yep.
Okay, and got a big dose of arsenic. Okay, now, arsenic suppresses potassium.
Right.
Okay. Now, just Google Gary Moller, The Poisoning of New Zealand with Arsenic. Just read it. And you'll see all the evidence there of the effects of bathing in a Central North Island natural geothermal hot pool. And I'm not talking about the heat exchanged pools. I'm talking about the ones that have natural water that looks green.
Yeah, and I've been in all of those. I've been in the ones in Tucano. I've been in the ones in Taupo. And here's the next thing. I spent a reasonable amount of time running around and drinking water from the streams in Wairau.
Okay. The Central North Island is known as the arsenic belt of New Zealand. And arsenic directly lowers potassium. So, Cameron, you need this is urgent. Okay, this is for you. You need to get one of those hair tissue tests done because we can pick up historic arsenic poisoning.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And you'll see examples on my website. Just Google Gary Moller arsenic.
Gary. So these things can be reversed, though, can't they?
Yes. The first thing we have to do is determine what's there. Like if there is arsenic, then the way that we get rid of it is we just apply exactly what I've been saying about how the universe operates. If there's arsenic, then we put in the mineral antagonists, which then shove the arsenic out of the body. If you've had glandular fever, then your liver will not be as efficient as it could otherwise be at detoxifying these things, which may be perhaps the reason why perhaps arsenic might have accumulated in your body more than the person who was sharing the pool with you.
Yes.
Okay, because we have differences in our ability to eliminate toxins. Some of us also tend to absorb things more. Our skin operates a little bit differently. You see, you could have soft, delicate skin, as smooth as a baby, and you'll just suck up those
that's not me.
Those toxins. I thought you were always thick-skinned.
Yeah, exactly. I got the height of a rhino. But anyway, this is real. This is like so fascinating, and it's the first time. I mean, for me to hear this, that there is possibility of a solution. To it, because that's the one thing that I haven't been able to work out yet is how to get this potassium issue, because I'll be perfectly honest. It frightens me that I can't get my potassium under control. And to have to spend a lifetime taking these supplements is incongruous and annoying. And, what if I forget? What if my potassium goes down? Because, I've had a stroke. I don't want another one. I don't want to have anything even remotely like that happen again. And not having my potassium solved frightens me, because it's the one thing I do. I am frightened. I'm not frightened of dying. I'm not frightened of a whole lot of things, but I'm frightened of living as a shell, and being trapped inside a body and my brain not being able to do a whole lot of things. And I love doing outdoor things. I love hunting. I love being in the bush. I love shooting. I love all of these things, right? And if I couldn't do those things and couldn't do what I love doing, which is, stuff like this radio show and writing and being involved in politics, because I'm trapped and, crippled by my body, rebelling against me, that frightens me. That's the one thing I'm frightened of.
Well, Cameron, you're a tough guy, and let's just change the language a little bit.
Sure.
Frightened's not a good word. Let's use the word concerned.
All right, we'll use
concerned. You're concerned. It's on your mind, and really, it's the fear of the unknown. If let's think of this: a stroke is potentially your enemy, and what a good general does before he does anything is he sends out his spies. You go out and gather information. Yeah. So why don't we learn more about what might be going on? And you've already connected a few dots. For example, if you just need to bathe once in one of these pools, and off air, you might want to tell me exactly which pool it was in, because I have actually gone and taken water samples and had them tested myself.
Yep.
So that I am able to then connect the hair tissue testing with where they bathed, and also connect it with the signs and symptoms, the health issues. And Cameron, you'll see in my articles, I've got at least 1,000 people who have been made very unwell, chronically unwell from bathing in these pools. It's a scandal. And they don't want to do anything about it because it goes to the heart of our tourism industry and, these beautiful, healthy, health-giving hot pools. Yeah. It's scandalous, okay? And I'm saying this because I've got the evidence, righto? I've got the evidence.
Well, it's not a secret. I mean, I, in my younger days, would go to the Takanu pools there, also the ones at Taupo. And as I said, I used to run around the hills of Wairau, playing soldier. And I knew about, we were always told in the army, and who knows if it was right or not, if you're going to drink water from the streams, make sure it's bubbling, that it's aerating when you get water from the streams and that. But, we were running around and we knew that there was arsenic in the soil. I looked up the history of how Wairau ended up with all that tussock and everything else. They tried to farm it and it didn't work. Everything just died, So the only thing that lived was tussock. And that was because of the arsenic in the soils.
Yes, arsenic and also a lack of like cobalt and a few other trace minerals as well. And so the first thing is to test. Now, just getting back to, so what do we do with stroke rehab? The first thing, so we've got to try and mitigate the secondary death of tissues. Those little brain cells that survived, we need to cuddle them and look after them and nurture them. Yep. Otherwise, they become stressed and died. And so, you want to minimize that occurring. And that's why, the clot busting drugs, the sucking out of the blood clot to restore circulation and so on, so that you don't get any further death. But antioxidants are certainly one of the key factors. But the trouble is, once a person is in hospital, the people around them, like, family and that, are essentially powerless. And so you've almost got to just sort of accept, well, that during this acute stage of recovery, just provide as much care as you can and just go with the flow. Now, as soon as possible, we should be trying to get nutrient-dense food in with all of the building blocks necessary for recovery and repair. Now, there's a few other things that can help. And again, it comes down to when is it practical to start incorporating these things.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing, and listeners can again do their Google search, is look at intermittent fasting. And the use of intermittent fasting to do two things. So what you can do is you can type into Google fasting and the words stem cell production. Okay, so what fasting does, when somebody goes into a fasting state, there is the release of adult stem cells. And those little stem cells, they somehow find their way to the brain, and instead of becoming a fireman, they get a message which says, you're going to become a little brain cell. And they somehow miraculously become a brain cell. So, this whole idea of neuroplasticity, that that the brain tissue can regenerate to a degree. When I studied anatomy, we were told by the time you're 7, you've got all your brain cells, and then you're losing so many per minute, for the rest of your life. That's not true. We're constantly rebuilding and restoring, and which is a really important principle, which you know very well, Cameron. Now, the other part to it is the stimulation of stem cells, and then the other is to type in fasting and growth hormone. Okay?
Right.
Fasting stimulates the production of growth hormone. Growth hormone and stem cells combined are what drive healing. Okay? Tissue regeneration and so on.
We kind of know this too, because, you look at the super athletes that have been caught doping, and they've all been injecting human growth hormone. Because that's how they get their bigger muscles, because they're healing the tears from all of those sorts of things. I mean, it sounds wrong, but that's what they were doing. They were healing the tears that were occurring from their extraneous exercise, and they were healing that with drugs instead of the way that you're suggesting that we heal it with doing things that our body recognizes, like fasting, like sorting out our nutrients, sorting out our vitamins, sorting out our diet and all those things. So you don't need to cheat and take a shortcut. You can do all these things. Like you said, it's a pyramid. Get all these things right at the base that provides a good, solid base to build this high pyramid that we're going to build, and then each layer of the pyramid is less and less required of the things that will make a big difference, but they wouldn't make a difference if you didn't have that base correct.
And it is rather interesting that when a person is seriously ill or injured, they have a loss of appetite. It's almost like the body says it's time for healing.
Yeah.
And so during that first stage, there is a complete loss of appetite. And that, I think, combines with the stimulation of the release of stem cells and growth hormone.
But it doesn't have to be bodily injury either. It could be something traumatic, like a divorce or a separation or something like that. People lose their appetite. When things like that happen, that trauma of that thing, the body says, no, you don't need this.
Yes.
You need to focus on this.
Just on that, these things are complicated. We don't become experts in stroke prevention and recovery overnight. It's complicated. So we're covering a lot of territory here. Now, one of the common factors that you see with anybody who's suffered any kind of head trauma, whether it be a stroke or a whack to the head of some sort, is we see the lingering effects of adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
So on a head tissue test, what we will see is a depression of the functioning of the adrenal glands.
Right.
Now, look, when somebody suffers any kind of head trauma, it's like a major assault on the body, okay? And the brain, the reptilian part of the brain says, we're under attack, okay? It's an incredibly terrible stress. Now, whether it's a divorce or whether it's, crises at work or, scaring the hell out of us.
Case. Could be a court case.
Yeah.
Could be anything that's stressful. Yeah.
Yeah. What happens is that it activates the fight or flight response. And if that goes on day after day, the person reaches a point where the adrenal glands basically shut up shop. Okay.
Well, so what you're talking about, Gary, is exactly my situation. 3 court cases. Yeah. The incredible stress of all of those. The impact of becoming public enemy number 1 with Nikki Hager's book, Dirty Politics, all of those things all piled on top of each other for years. And, and doing what I do nearly killed me. And now I'm finding out that it's all of these things. Yes, so you could say, there was the stress of that, but now I'm starting to understand the pathology of it, of how that works.
Well, look, the perfect solution to all of your stresses and woes is to go and relax in a hot pool.
Yeah. And it just adds some arsenic onto that.
You got to remember that arsenic used to be the poison of choice by disaffected wives, for knocking off the old bastard. Yeah. But the trouble is we can now test for it.
Yeah. I'm learning so much from this conversation, and hopefully others will be as well.
Yeah, Far Lap was poisoned with arsenic. I've actually got the test results here.
Right.
Yeah.
Who did it? The Australians?
Well, we don't know who did it, but we know that it was done. Because here's the thing. Hair keeps growing after death. So, in Far Lap's case, the arsenic levels were measured, and then in the last hours of growth, there's this massive spike of arsenic.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, the same was done to Napoleon Bonaparte.
Oh, right.
Okay. Yeah.
Just
lacing his food with arsenic, and you can see it in the lock of hair that was tested.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. But anyway, back to stroke. What we can see is that the other thing, Cameron, is how much can be learned by having a conversation. And one of the problems medically is that the consultations or the time is now less than 10 minutes. Okay. It's a rushed visit, whereas what's needed is a conversation where little clues, blues clues are offered, which then allow one to start connecting dots, and then doing the appropriate testing helps to confirm and then provide direction. Okay, so you can see some dots are being connected here. Now, there's a lot of things that can be done nutritionally, and bearing in mind the loss of appetite. But while somebody is lying, say, on unconscious, sedated, it doesn't really matter, though. It would be lovely to be able to get some antioxidants into them, righto? But when they are ready to start eating, the food needs to be nutrient dense. And that just simply does not happen in a hospital environment at all. Zero. Okay?
Yeah.
And so that's where the family bringing in the food. Now, for example, a super smoothie. One of the first meals used to be chicken soup.
Yeah.
Righto? Homemade chicken soup. That's a good one. But also a whey protein smoothie with all of your essential fatty acids, fat-soluble vitamins, and other things to fortify it. There's a recipe on my website. Just Google Gary Moller super smoothie, and you'll see the sort of thing that can be done.
Have you made it taste nice? Because like when I hear smoothie, Gary, I hear hippie food, spirulina. It looks sad. It probably tastes sad. I want it to taste like vanilla ice cream. Does your super smoothie taste of vanilla ice cream?
It can. It can. But, God.
It's just me.
Harden up, mate. Harden up. Come on. Look, I'm just going to read. This is what, at 4 months of age, this is my Plunkett book. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I was 4 months of age, This is what the Plunkett nurse prescribed my mother because I was failing to thrive as a baby.
Yeah.
Brains, grated kidney, liver, flaked fish, tripe with minced chicken. Okay?
Right.
Now, that's what my mother was feeding me at 4 months of age.
Right.
Now, and you're complaining about whether or not it's vanilla. Come on, harden up, mate. The thing is, what we should be focusing on is the nutritional value of the food rather than the taste.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yes, we can make it delicious for you, Cameron. Yeah,
Right.
we will make that concession. But
I think that what we need to do, Gary, here is let's use me as an example or a test in a very public way, right, on this radio station, on the show.
Okay.
And see if we can fix all of these things. I'm just looking at your super smooth recipe here. Half a scoop of your ultra protein plus some additional whey protein, blackcurrant. I like blackcurrant, so we're on a winner there. I think I could eat your super smoothie every morning.
Yes, I think you have the old recipe there, by the way, but that's okay.
Just on your website here.
Yeah.
And but anyway, every morning I have stupid things like a few supplements and some Baroccas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're saying if I do this instead, I'm going to get a much better result. Well,
first of all, Cam, test, okay? Yep. Because do you need that Barocca or don't you? Okay, that's the first thing. It's about balancing, and another principle in nutrition is the Goldilocks zone. Not too much, not too little, just right. And that's where the testing becomes important. There was that question. We all need vitamin C, but how much? We all need zinc, but how much?
Yeah.
And it's about getting it. And so if you've got a whole lot of copper, for example, in your body, then you need a whole lot more vitamin C and a whole lot more zinc.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But if you've got low copper, you don't want to. You need to bring the copper up before you start pumping a whole lot of this other stuff in. Otherwise, you make matters worse. You don't get better.
Right, right.
So
this is going to be fascinating. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm just looking at these photos. They look delicious, I've got to say. They do look.
They're just stock photos.
You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say, yes, that's exactly what they look. The green one with the cucumber. Yeah, that's not me. That's not me.
Again, Cam, look, the colour is really important. Always just keep reminding yourself those warm primary colours are what Mother Nature uses to tell you that it's good for you. Okay?
Just on a little sidetrack on it, just briefly. There's some things that I just cannot stand the taste of, and people might say I'm fussy or whatever, but there's a couple of things that I just can't stand. And is that my body saying you don't need this?
Possibly, yes.
So there's things like, I really don't like tomatoes, the taste of them, and cucumbers the same. I really like, as soon as I taste them, it's like, ugh. And the other one that is just awful is used in Thai cooking a lot. It's gone completely out of my head now. But I can't stand that either.
So there may be childhood traumas there, but I'm just pulling your leg, Cam.
Coriander. It's interesting. I cannot stand eating coriander. It tastes like tin.
Well, one of the highest levels of potassium I've seen on a hair tissue test was in a gardener who ate loads and loads of tomatoes. Right. Tomatoes, as you probably know, along with cucumbers, are excellent sources of dietary potassium.
Right.
So that's rather fascinating. Again, I want to do the testing. Now, it's possible that you may have low levels of potassium in your blood, in your circulation, but you may have high tissue potassium. We need to test you and find out. So this will be an interesting exercise indeed.
And then we can do round 3 of how to deal with strokes. recovery and things.
Now, the next thing that needs to be done in stroke, and this used to be my job, okay? Every morning I'd do the ward rounds. Yep. And my job was to lift the limbs and do movement patterning.
Yep.
Okay. Now, basically, movement patterning is replicating the basic movements of human movement.
Yep. I know exactly what that is.
Yes. And the first thing, if you think of when somebody suffered any kind of brain injury, they lose the ability to walk properly. Yeah. And in fact, we need to go back to the very beginning stages of movement development in a baby. So what is the first thing that a baby does? You put them on their tummy, and you get them to lift their head, okay? Yeah. And when, of course, they lift their head up, the parents are all excited. And that's what we need to do with somebody who's suffered any kind of brain injury, is you start by putting them on their tummy and getting them to just simply use those extension muscles of the spine.
That's exactly what my physiotherapist said to me at the time. Your brain's forgotten how to do this, so you're back. Yeah,
you've got to rewire it.
You're back to being a baby, but we can shortcut that, and we do this with repetition, and we do these things. So yes.
So I'll go through those stages so that listeners can, because they're just not doing it in the hospital anymore, at least not to the right degree. And like you said, it's got to be done 1,000 times and then 1,000 times more. It's got to be just repetition. Okay.
Let me tell you, they're not doing it at all in the hospital.
I know. I'm
That's my
deeply
experience.
Disappointed. I'm very disappointed. Okay, because sure, the majority of people, they have their full recovery, but what about that 10 or 15% who really need this therapy? Otherwise, they end up with permanent, unnecessary disabilities.
Completely unnecessary disability.
So the first thing is just simply being on the belly and doing a kind of press up, keeping the hips on the ground and trying to push up. It's sort of like it's a yoga, exercise. And then the next thing is practicing rolling from your tummy onto your left, over on the left-hand side onto your back, and then onto your right side. Left, right, rolling. Yep. That needs to be done repetitively, practicing doing that. Then the next thing, from the lifting of up of the head and pushing up with the hands, is getting up onto one's knees and hands, and then walking on your hands and knees on a nice soft carpet or something. We used to do it on a raised mat, a huge gymnastics in that mat. Yep. Okay, and then practicing. So before you can walk, you've got to be able to crawl. Any parent knows this. You do not allow a baby to miss out on crawling. Okay, they've got to crawl, otherwise they will be a clumsy walker.
Yep.
And then you finally gravitate to walking. And the walking needs to be left to right. Now, you will see this with anybody who's had any kind of serious illness or injury. When they first get out of bed, they walk sort of like with their hands by their side. Or you'll see this in elderly people. They put their hands behind their backs.
Yeah.
Okay, and carry their handbag on their bum.
Now, that was one of the things that they taught me with one of my physiotherapists, as they said, you need to learn how to walk properly. And in New Zealand, in modern society with shoes and all of these different things, people have not learned how to walk properly. And it was quite an interesting experience. And they said the easiest way to do this is to do what's called Nordic walking, where you've got these poles. Right now, you'll see some usually elderly people doing Nordic walking, and they've got the poles out in front of them. And that's not how you do it. You have the poles behind you, which seems counterintuitive, but it teaches you how to walk properly, where you basically sit back down into your pelvis. You swing your shoulders and your hips as you walk and swing your arms. And that's how we're designed to walk. And once you learn how to do that properly, then it dramatically improves the distance that you can walk, because you're not being fatigued by the action of walking anymore, because you're actually doing it in tune with your body. And I've that's what I tell people who have had strokes or similar injuries with their legs, and I said, take up Nordic walking, learn how to do it properly, and it will dramatically increase your ability to walk better than you've ever done before. And that's the one thing that I did. Nordic walking made a huge difference. Yes.
So I've got a photograph of my mother. One of the first things I gave her after it was apparent that she had suffered a mild stroke, a first stroke, is I gave her some Nordic walking poles.
Yeah.
And the Nordic walking poles, one of the things that happens with stroke is the person, unless they're concentrating, they forget what that hemiplegic side of their limb is doing. They just forget it, and then it will drag, and the hand will drop down by the side. Yep. Whereas when they've got the poles, when they've got the poles, they are more likely to remember. Because there's that visual and tactile feedback that they're receiving. So Nordic walking, but you've touched on something. Find a Nordic walking coach to teach you the right technique. Now, another thing about walking, Cam, so you spent a bit of time in the army.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I spent time in the army as well. And one of the things that we learned was how to march.
Yeah.
And marching is just so important. And using the audible hup, 1, 2, 3, 4, left, right,
yep.
And so on. You can get some headphones and put on like Dr. Hawk, Dr. Hook, with his Blue Jeans song and all that sort of stuff, and
that's exactly right. But that's exactly what I did. I was using the Nordic walking, and I was, right at the start when it was really difficult and my right foot was dragging, and as I got tighter and tighter, and that's when I actually used the marching regimes. It was left, right, left, right, left, right. Because your body doesn't know how to swing properly, and eventually it's this repetition again, right? This is the thing with stroke recovery. It's repetition, hundreds, thousands of times doing things over and over and over again. I was lucky, right? I do pistol shooting, I do shotgun shooting. You get good at those things through thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions. And so for me, it was natural to do that, right?
Okay, so Cam. Okay, so one of the things that I ask people when I'm doing a consultation is, have you ever owned a firearm?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I've never owned just one.
Okay, righto. Okay. So you've the worst can be shotguns, by the way, but what's associated with that? Right.
Well, there's primers, and there's lead. Primers and lead and all sorts of stuff.
That sweet smell is the lead vapor, as the shot or the bullet is vaporizing metal as it goes out down the barrel. Yep. And the other is, have you ever cleaned a gun?
Yeah, well, the thing is, there used to be lead projectiles, and then they had copper-jacketed lead projectiles. So there's lots of copper involved, and when you're cleaning a rifle, you've got to get the copper out, you've got to get the lead out, and you've got to be really careful on all of that. Well,
remember what I said about copper.
Oh yeah.
Okay, copper being an antagonist. Okay, so there is. Look, I've even had guys with lead poisoning from doing party tricks of blowing smoke rings out of the barrel, from the barrel of a shotgun. Okay. Now, the thing is that we can now see potentially multiple sources of contaminants, of toxins that could lead to these health issues.
Because of my lifestyle, because of my hobbies.
and maybe too much ice cream, okay? Now, so rhythm, teaching people how to walk, but they've got to crawl. They've got to practice lifting their head. And even after that, Cam, you should still be getting on the ground and rolling.
I do.
You should be on your hands and knees. Okay.
Pilates is saving. He's a guy.
Yeah, Pilates is fabulous.
Hunting, shooting, tough guy, right? That's me, right? And I've always ridiculed yoga and Pilates and everything. But you know what? Since I took up Pilates, since I took up yoga, I've shot the best I've ever shot. I've improved my body out of sight by doing these things. And I really highly recommend Pilates and yoga and those sort of Pilates more than yoga because it's so repetitive. Pilates, doing things over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's what has healed me, doing those sorts of things.
So your basics of rolling, crawling, walking.
Yep.
And you definitely have to be able to walk beautifully, smoothly before you ever think of trying to run.
Yeah.
Okay. Things have to be in order. Now, the beauty about Pilates, when you think about it, most human movements are not linear. They are diagonal. So when you punch, when you throw, when you walk, it's actually a diagonal movement across the plane of the body.
Yeah, there's lots of triangles involved. Same with shooting. Shooting's swinging, and it's all angles and everything like that. Nothing's ever straight in the human body.
Yes, that's right. And that's why getting on a gym machine, which does linear movements and which does not involve balance, are not really as beneficial as doing like freestanding exercise with pulleys, for example, or using your own body as providing the resistance.
And that's why Pilates is so important because it uses your own body, you're using pulleys, you're creating these angles and these things that occur naturally.
Now, there's one other thing that is really important in stroke rehabilitation, and this is countering the spasticity in the arm and the leg. It's usually one side that's that's been
the hardest thing, now, for me is covering that up. This is when you do exercise and all of a sudden you get these shakes and these jitters because you can't control your muscles.
So one of the things that I mentioned, I did my morning rounds of the wards.
Yeah.
And my job was to mobilize those paralyzed or spastic limbs. Now, this is where I think the hospital today is letting down patients terribly.
Yeah.
There is a great risk during the first month or so following a stroke of developing frozen shoulder.
Tell me about it. Guess what I've had?
Yep. And this is what I learned in Sweden, is the use of various physical therapies for helping to counter the contractures that develop in the spastic limbs. And this needs to start within a week of the injury. For example, the arm that is spastic needs to be repeatedly extended.
Yep.
And that includes being extended overhead. Okay.
Yeah, it's all sorts of things, overhead and then out to the side. Even like bending your wrist back, like that. That's all the sort of things that I've gone through.
Yes.
And done all that to stretch those ligaments and stretch those muscles out.
So, Cam, was your right side affected?
Yeah.
Well, you've got incredible mobility there. Just looking, listeners can't see it, but you've got almost complete dexterity and you can get your arm above your head. Okay. Yes. Now, not being able to lift one's arm or get one's arm painlessly above one's head can be a terrible disability. Just the effort of putting clothes on.
Yep.
If you can't get your arm above your head, it's a disability. It's a terrible disability.
Totally.
The other thing is that if one falls and if there are contractures, there is a risk of suffering extremely painful injuries.
Yep.
By landing on that limb.
You can't break your fall. There's a whole lot of things. Here's the other thing I found out when I went up to I went and visited a friend of mine who does traditional, Rarotongan deep muscle massage and that. When I visited him after 3 months, I went up there. But I went in the water in Rarotonga and I was trying to swim. Well, you can't swim. Like, you literally can't swim. You can't, if you've got one arm that doesn't work, you can't even tread water. And I found this out, and I thought, and and I was in the ocean, and I thought, I better get out of here because I couldn't control anything. And in the end, I just had to stay in the pool to do it because there was a real risk that I'd actually drown because I couldn't save myself. And my mates all teased me and called me a circle swimmer, because I couldn't. But you can't actually do any sort of swimming because you need that balance, and it doesn't exist there. But after a week with him beating the hell out of me, I went up there. I couldn't lift my arm above my head, and after a week of him beating the hell out of me, I could lift my arm above my head. And that just changed everything once I could do that.
So you've actually touched on another part of the therapy, and that is deep tissue massage, because a lot of the painful contractures, the headaches, the neck pain, the shoulder pain, hip pain, and so on, can be alleviated by doing deep tissue massage. And anybody who's suffered any kind of injury resulting in spasticity or weakness of muscles, they would benefit from a once-a-week deep tissue massage. Now, it's a matter of finding the right person. Now, you mentioned Cook Island massage therapists. Well, it just so happens the other side of my family, my children are Cook Islanders, and I learned massage therapy myself from traditional island methods.
Yeah, and now, then there's myofascial release as well. All of that sort of stuff comes.
Yeah, so there's those sorts of therapies. Even finding a good Thai massage therapist can be one of the best. Yes. They can be excellent in relieving muscle spasm. And just once a week is all that's required, but once a week ongoing. And as you will gather, these things do cost money because you've got to pay them, to do these classes and that. But Cameron, it is absolutely worth the investment because
100%.
there is that law of diminishing returns. You can't do much in those first 2 or 3 weeks, but then that's when the therapy really needs to start ramping up. Bearing in mind that, with a head injury comes poor concentration, very poor stamina. But look, anybody who's been in bed for a week, they're going to be tired and exhausted anyway, and then put a head injury on top of it. And it is hard going, but that's where surrounding yourself with motivated family, good quality therapists and that really come in.
What I found, early on, like when the second day and I was in hospital, there was no use having a pity party. It is what it is. And now we've got to set about setting some goals. Now, when I first had the stroke, I thought, this will take me 6 months to fix. Well, here I am 5 years later. I'm still improving. I'm still getting stronger. I mean, there was a time I couldn't even hold a 1 kilo weight in my right hand. My fingers would just straighten out and it would drop down onto the floor, right? So to go from being really strong and doing a whole lot of things to not even being able to hold a 1 kilo weight, which is nothing. It's two things of butter in my right hand. I couldn't even hold it, to now being doing the things I can do now. It's just about, you have to have a perseverance and a willpower to do it for yourself. And then you add all these other things in that we've talked about. And slowly but surely, you will regain the use of.
Well, Cameron, have you looked into hyperbaric oxygen therapy?
Well, actually, a friend of mine has just installed one in Auckland, and he wants me to go along and do that. So that'll, I guess, will be another episode of this. How we're going to deal with strokes. So we've covered so much today, but only a little bit. There's so much that can be done, and it's so exciting. To do it.
Let me just say, and for listeners, what they can do is type into YouTube HBOT and stroke recovery and look at some of the videos, I think every hospital in New Zealand should have a hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber.
Yeah.
And ACC should be funding HBOT. There's enough evidence now to show that it is effective. But its greatest effect is in the acute stage. Like, we should take, within hours of somebody having a stroke, one of the things we should be doing is super saturating their bodies with oxygen under pressure. Okay?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because your brain has had an injury. It's been deprived of oxygen in a particular area. Let's get it. It's kind of like doing life support for somebody when they have a heart attack or whatever, get their heart pumping. The reason why we get their heart pumping is to get oxygen in. The reason why we do the emergency breathing for them is to get oxygen into the blood. By putting them in a hyperbaric chamber, it's super saturating their blood with oxygen. If that's all you're breathing, and it's getting into those injured areas and helping those injured and anemic little blood cells that are sitting there or the brain cells that are sitting there struggling, all of a sudden they get some blood with huge amounts of oxygen. They're going to grow faster and fix themselves a whole lot better, right?
Well, and in that acute stage, by bypassing the loss of circulation, when the pressure and the concentration is high enough, it actually completely bypasses the lack of blood flow, which therefore reduces the damage being done to those brain cells. You see, it's the damage that occurs in the minutes and then hours and even days after the initial injury. That we want to prevent with things like antioxidants, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and of course the clot busting drugs and so on. So
Gary,
there is a law of diminishing returns. So you get this rapid resolution over the first 3 weeks or so, and then even 5 years later, Cameron, there's still maybe 1%, and it's that little percent that can make a massive difference to one's quality of life. The other point to make, and I know we've got to wrap this up in a minute, is that it's never ending. Even after 5 years, it's sort of like when somebody's had, it's never ending. You just keep plugging away at not only maximizing the recovery, but those things that maximize recovery also maximize the protection against suffering another episode. Now, I just want to add just one other thing.
Sure.
Cam, lemon peel, citrus peel.
Yeah.
Okay. Look it up on Google. Type into Google citrus peel and cardiovascular disease, citrus peel stroke. Put in citrus peel and cancer, and you will see. Now, here's the thing, okay? Cameron, if it's good enough to use a citrus detergent to degrease the chain on your bicycle or the engine block of your car, then citrus peel is probably good for clearing your arteries.
Yeah.
Okay? So think of citrus peel as being Mr. Muscle Drano for your arteries. To keep nice, clean arteries, a beautiful blood flow to your brain, look at the role of citrus peel, not citrus juice, but citrus peel.
Yeah.
Okay? It's amazing. Just look it up and you will see. You can Google Gary Moller healthy citrus peel recipe. Okay, and you can look it up for yourself. But we could actually do a whole session on citrus peel and the various health benefits associated with it.
Well, Gary, we've covered so much today, and we've only touched on the immediate aftermath of a stroke in recovery. I've learned a whole lot more that I wish I'd known 5 years ago. But that's all right, because, as you say, you can keep on doing these things and get incremental changes. And that's what I've experienced, and that's what I'd say to people who are listening, is just because you think you've stopped improving doesn't mean you haven't stopped improving, right? You just got to go and do it again, or do more, or change it up, or do something else. and you will see those improvements. And, I've spent 5 years getting to the point where I am now, and I feel that I really have a responsibility to share what I've learned with other people so that they don't have to go through what I've gone through, right? And that's why, I think we will continue this series. We'll have another couple of these where we can extend on from that. And, I'm really interested in finding out a little bit more using some of your tests and things like that. So we'll take that bit offline, and then we'll touch base again with the listeners and let them know what the results of those tests were. And then we'll, of course, be able to look at all of the suggested therapies and treatments that you direct me towards, because I'm up for anything if it comes to improving my life. It's already a whole lot better because of all the physical things that I've done. Now I need to fix the internal things, and I think we'll be able to do a whole lot of that. So I really appreciate your time today, and as I said, I've learned so much, and hopefully the listeners will have too.
Well, it's a pleasure.
There was only so much time available, and this discussion is going to have to be continued in much more detail. I'm going to go and get those tests done, and then Gary and I will look at next steps. So stay tuned for the next installment. I can't wait. And this is exciting to see if I can find out the last piece of that post-stroke puzzle that has been vexing me for so long. Tell me your thoughts on what Gary had to say by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now. This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Graham Davis is an award-winning journalist who, like me, was born in Fiji. He was deeply involved inside the Bainimarama government, and then ultimately saw there needed to be change in Fiji, and so campaigned to help end that government. At first, he was an enthusiastic supporter of the new government led by Sitiveni Rabuka, but he's become disillusioned with the political and constitutional developments back in our home country. To discuss Fiji's coup culture and political developments, he joins me now. Graham Davis, welcome to The Crunch.
Thanks, Cam.
Now, for our listeners' edification, you're a Kaiviti, like me, born in Fiji.
Yes, that's right.
A few years ahead of me, I might add.
Not that many, old boy.
No, but, you were brought up in Fiji and then went on to become essentially a journalist and foreign correspondent. You've won a few awards, and then you went back to Fiji to help out the Bainimarama government.
Yeah,
but I thought it'd be a good idea, Graham, before we get started on what's happening now in Fiji, to do a little bit of a history on the coup culture and the things that we've witnessed as people who were born in Fiji, and the hopes and things that we might have ended at some point, but it looks like we're heading back towards that coup culture again.
Yes. Well, look, Cam, as you know, Fiji gained its independence from Britain in 1970, and there were very high hopes that it would actually, defy the trends in the third world to kind of go downhill, take the Zimbabwe road, and that Fiji could be an example to the world. And in fact, the visiting Pope in 1986 visited Fiji, Pope Paul, I think it was, and said Fiji, was the way the world should be, because there was racial harmony and economic progress and all of that. Well, all that came to an end in 1987 when Sitiveni Rabuka, who 36 years later is again the prime minister, staged two coups in 1987. And of course, he did it in the name of indigenous supremacy. You know, at that time, Fiji, the majority population in Fiji were the Indians who'd been brought by the British to work in the cane fields.
Yep.
They outnumbered the Itākei. The Itākei felt threatened, or certainly that's what Rambuka said. So as number 3 in the military at the time, he staged the first coup in May 1987 and then another one later in the year. And this was to assert indigenous supremacy. It's quite a long story in the sense that sort of after a period of military rule, Sitiveni Rambuka won an election and for some years was the democratically elected leader of Fiji, and sort of Fiji returned to parliamentary rule and everything was fine. What happened in 2000, if you'll recall, was the George Speight rebellion, which was against, an Indian or Indo-Fijian elected prime minister called Mahendra Chaudhry. Now, he was removed by Speight with the support of some elements of the military. And of course, after a period in which this was put down and George Speight became the last person to be sentenced to death in Fiji, to hang by the neck, but this was subsequently sort of commuted to life imprisonment, and he remains in jail in Fiji.
He's quite mad, isn't he?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, he certainly had delusions of grandeur at the time, but he still commands a tremendous amount of support. And in fact, there have been moves by the present government, led by Rambuka, and his Attorney General, a guy called Siromi Turanga, who's a fanatical Christian and also an indigenous supremacist, to free George Speight. Now, the current military have said that that's not on, and that would trigger an immediate coup. So the plans to release Speight that were being mooted earlier in the year haven't come to pass. But look, to cut a long story short, and I know you wanted to dwell on some of the background of this, in 2006, Frank Bainimarama staged a coup in Fiji against the ethno-nationalists, at that stage led by a guy called Laisania Garase. So the military took over, they imposed their will on the country.
Now, Garase was hopelessly corrupt, wasn't he?
Well, what is corrupt in the Fijian context? I mean, I'm not going to point a particular finger at him because there are all sorts of shenanigans that go on in the place. Suffice it to say, though, that his indigenous supremacist agenda included a thing called the Gorlingorli Bill, which would have required non-Itākei or non-Indigenous people to pay to use natural resources, like to pay to go to the beach, to pay to go fishing, even though they were full citizens. Now, that was unacceptable to Frank Bainimarama as head of the military, and he staged a coup and removed Garase. Until 2014, Fiji was ruled with an iron fist by Frank Bainimarama.
Yeah.
In 2013, he and his Attorney General, a guy called Ayaz Said Qayyum, produced a constitution. Now, the constitution, there were sort of, superficial consultations, but essentially it was foisted on the country. And for the first time, that constitution provided for a common and equal citizenry in which, every vote was equal because it was weighted in favor of the indigenous people in previous constitutions. A 1990 constitution and a 1997 constitution. So, in other words, Bainimarama and Qayyum leveled the playing field. Yeah, they also
those are admirable goals, weren't they?
Well, absolutely. I think you supported it, didn't you?
Well, I think you and I both did. We were quite vocal, saying, "Well, this is the way forward. You can't have a country that's separated by race." Ironic, given that you live in Australia and you've just had the Voice debate, and in New Zealand we've got this ongoing co-governance and treaty principles debate that's going on in New Zealand. We only need to look at Fiji on what happens if you do start having laws where race is separated in particular parts of it to see what a disaster that ends up in. I mean, Sitiveni Rambuka's first two coups were entirely race-based. It was about subjugating the Indian population, the Indo-Fijian population. And then we had, Bainimarama, who supposedly was going to now create this equality. And this is why we supported him, because here he was working hand in glove with an Indo-Fijian and saying we're all one people. That included people like ourselves who sometimes are disparagingly called Kaivalangi, right? Foreigners. And when in actual fact, we were born in Fiji. I was born in Suva. You were born
in Suva as well.
In Suva.
I think we were born in the same maternity unit, right?
Probably, but we're as much Fijian as anybody else, and so it was welcome to hear somebody who's Itaukai saying we're all the same. You're born in Fiji. Well, you see, you're a Fijian. This is the thing. I know, Cam, and this is the thing. Even today, a lot of Itaukai don't accept the fact that if you're born in Fiji, that makes you a full citizen, a Fijian. And in fact, one of the things that has caused a huge amount of upset in Fiji since Rambuka came back to power by one vote on the floor of the parliament last December is that he endorsed the notion that Itaukai refer to Fiji citizens born in Fiji as Vulangi. Now, Vulangi means visitor, It's rude.
It is rude, but it's also interpreted by non-Itaukai as a fundamental assault on the constitutional provision for a common and equal citizenry and a common identity, because Bainimarama made everybody Fijian. Now that was against a huge protest by the Itaukai who actually believed that this English word Fijian belongs to them. Now, so this has been a simmering problem. And so it's also important for the audience in New Zealand to realise this, Cam, which you already know. Yes. Since 1987, tens of thousands of Indo-Fijians and people of other races left Fiji, so that the indigenous people now comprise more than 60% of the population, right? Yeah. They own 94% of the total land surface. They were never dispossessed in the way Maori or Aborigines were in Australia. Yeah. So there is no threat whatsoever to them in terms of their position in national life, and yet they have this kind of notion that somehow they should have supremacy and ascendancy over the other races. And this is one of the great ironies, as far as I'm concerned. Itaukai come and live in Australia and New Zealand, they're benefiting from these work programs and everything else. They get full entitlement to everything. No one in Australia says, oh, listen, you don't belong here. You're a visitor here. They come and go. And in fact, Fiji's second biggest revenue earner, and during the pandemic, its first biggest revenue, was remittances sent by Fijians working, in the diaspora back home,
Exactly,
So I have, in extremis described Fiji as a beggar nation because it's dependent on Fijians living overseas sending money back to their people. It's dependent on foreign aid, and it's dependent on the tourists, including New Zealanders who go to Fiji and keep the whole place afloat.
And the United Nations who rent their soldiers.
Well, exactly, and something really very disturbing has happened recently in relation to this government, and that is, as you know, there was a vote at the United Nations, sponsored by the Arab countries, for there to be a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza to enable them to get relief to the civilians in Gaza and to end the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. New Zealand, as you know, supported the humanitarian resolution. Australia abstained, but Fiji sided with Israel to support the continuation of the bombardment when it has Fijian peacekeepers in the Middle East. Now, I would have thought that was a folly of the first order because it immediately makes them targets. Right. And in 2014, Fijian peacekeepers were kidnapped and held hostage by a group called Al-Nusra, and it took Qatar and various other Arab countries to come to Fiji's assistance and to pay ransoms amounting to tens of millions of dollars for the release of these people. Now, are those ransoms going to be forthcoming now that Fiji has voted with Israel at the UN?
Well, it's tens of millions of dollars that the UN remits to Fiji for renting its soldiers. And into 2014, I was actually in Israel when that happened, when they were kidnapped by al-Nusra. Yeah. And, I was up on Mount Bental in the Golan Heights and, when it happened. And there were actually some Fijian soldiers there, and I was having a good old chinwag with them when the news broke, and they were sort of up sticks and bugged out, ready to go and get their mates back, and they were all ready to go for it. So, I remember that very, very clearly in 2014. And it's funny because I went to Israel via Suva because I interviewed Frank Bainimarama after he'd just won the election in 2014. Yeah. And so, I remember that very starkly. And it just shows, though, that there's something strange happening in Fiji at the moment. And that's why I wanted to get you on my show so that we could kind of like unravel it, because the media here has a somewhat slanted view of Fiji, and the general population in New Zealand, and I imagine it's the same in Australia, the only time they think about Fiji is when they're going for their winter holidays, or one or two of the All Blacks or Wallabies team are from Fiji. Yeah, it's about the only contact.
Or when there's a coup.
Or when there's a coup, right? now, and I know that apart from the Spate coup, that coups in Fiji are somewhat circumspect as far as coups worldwide go. I mean,
you mean in the sense that they don't have deaths or whatever. People
they sort killed. They block off about 3 blocks in Suva and a couple of bridges. And that's pretty much it. Life goes on around. In fact, I've had mates as you have tell us that it's actually quite good having a coup in Fiji because it solves the crime problem for a while.
Well, this is a very important thing. If this was Papua New Guinea, it might be different, because Papua New Guinea, the people of Papua New Guinea, as you know, are armed to the teeth. Yeah. The military in Fiji has always ensured that the military, the RFMF, are the only people in Fiji who have weapons, right? Yeah. So that the police aren't armed and the civilians aren't armed, and so that accounts for the fact that may account for the fact that there have been minimum casualties in these altercations in the past. Yeah. But you hit on a very important point there, and look, I don't blame Australian and New Zealand media, except for their relative lack of interest in the Pacific until now, of course, which is changing because everyone's worried about Chinese influence. Yes. Because, as far as Fiji is concerned, I mean, you were born there, I was born there, but we'd still have to, acknowledge the truth of Churchill's saying about Russia, that to coin that phrase, that Fiji is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Yeah, it's incredibly hard to find out what the hell's going on there at any one time.
And the coconut wireless, as it's affectionately called in Fiji, and for listeners who think that that's an insult, that's actually what people call it in Fiji. The coconut wireless is faster than any media or electronic form known to man.
Yes, and that's in the Pacific generally, because I was fascinated when I went to New Caledonia that they call it, radio cocotier. So it's a Pacific thing, the drums of rumor.
Someone in Nandi or Lambasa knows what's going on in Suva before the people in Suva know what's going on in Suva. It's that quick.
That's sometimes true. But of course, the other problem is, Cam, and you'd understand this, that every story in the retelling, is modified in some way, so that once it's retold sort of a dozen times, it can be a very remote resemblance of the original story. Yes. So the rumor mill in Fiji, churns away relentlessly. And I mean, I've got a daily blog on politics, and it's just one of the biggest challenges I have really is to separate rumor from fact. Yeah. And I have a policy that, if I get something wrong, that I correct it and I apologize. Yep. Fortunately, that doesn't happen too often, but only because I've had, international media training in which, you generally try to make sure that what you're reporting is correct. You can never be 100% certain, but
you've also
at least you're making an effort. Yeah.
Yeah. You've also got a network of people that are in business, or, it's like me as well. When I'm dealing with Fiji or talking, I always, make sure I talk to you, or I talk to some of the other people that I've known that are in government or not in government or in business, just to try and get a feel of what's going on. But, I've found in the last few months, it devilishly difficult to get any semblance or a view of where the direction of travel is in Fiji and the government.
Well, look, there's a pretty easy explanation for that, right? Most people, even though Fiji first got more votes than anyone else in at the last election, and they're the majority, they're the biggest bloc in the parliament. There was a huge movement for change. I mean, Bainimarama and Kayum had become increasingly dictatorial, increasingly authoritarian. They had begun to breach, the very constitution that they had imposed on the country. And there was a huge sentiment for change. And Sitiveni Rambuka managed, quite cleverly, really, to persuade everybody that he was a leopard who'd changed his spots. He was no longer the indigenous supremacist of 1987.
He convinced you,
but a man for all people. Yes, he convinced me. In fact, this was the thing. I said, I'm willing to accept the fact that he's changed, but I did recommend that people vote for his coalition partner, the National Federation Party led by Bim Prasad, as a means, which is a moderate party compared to, my perception certainly of Sitiveni Rambuka's People's Alliance. But, I've had to be very critical of Bim Prasad because he's allowed Sitiveni Rambuka in the 11 months since the last election in December to pursue these policies, which are not in the best interests of non-Italke and non-Indigenous people. And also, they are putting at risk national stability because they're doing exactly what the military in Fiji have said that they must not do, and that is that they are defying the 2013 Constitution and its provisions.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a good time to lead to the current thing, Cam, because at year's end, after 11 months of these guys, there's a constitutional crisis looming and the very real prospect of a military intervention again.
Well, see, this is just before we get into that, I mean, I've met Pio Tikanduadua many times, had discussions with him, and he always struck me as a man of integrity, a straight up shooter.
Good guy, yeah.
He actually went to war with Bainimarama inside the Bainimarama government. And he was treated appallingly by Bainimarama and particularly by the then Attorney General.
Yeah.
And left, and there was all sorts of rumours that he had all these diseases and all these things were going on, but he's still there. And I struggle to see how he can sit there propping up a government that appears to be acting against the best interest of every Fijian.
Well, there is that. There's no doubt about that. But, leaving aside the question of motive and what have you, you've got to remember that these people are these are minority parties. Yeah,
yes.
There's a 5% threshold that you have to meet in Fiji to get any seats in the parliament at all, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the National Federation Party only just made it across the threshold for them to get 3 seats, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the same happened with SEDELPA, which is the other member of the coalition, the three-legged stool, they call it, the People's Alliance, the National Federation Party, and SEDELPA.
Rambuka gutted SEDELPA, though, didn't he? When he split away and created the People's Alliance, a lot of the people from SEDELPA went there, and they're essentially a rump party.
Yes. But they delivered government by one vote to the existing coalition that had been formed before the election between the People's Alliance and the National Federation Party. But just to return to your point, the reason why these guys are enablers and appeasers is that they have got cabinet positions which they would otherwise not have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've been propelled into positions of power because of the arrangements that have been forged, and they need to keep the coalition in power, whatever it takes. Yeah. Now, I've waged a big campaign against the Minister for Education in the coalition, who beat and tortured his ex-wife, who happened to be Sitiveni Rambuka's daughter, right? To the point where Rambuka found her bloodied in the family home and only just got her to hospital in time to save her life. He is now not only one of Rambuka's ministers in the cabinet, he's the Minister for Education, right? So a domestic violence perpetrator is in charge of the futures of Fijian young people. Now, why is that happening? And without any protest whatsoever from the women's movement in Fiji, it's because of their desperation to keep the coalition in power and stave off any return by Bainimarama.
But Bainimarama's not going to come back, is he? I mean, he's out of Parliament. He escaped he was prosecuted, but was eventually wasn't convicted.
No, but Cam, I don't know whether you're aware, the illegal Director of Public Prosecutions has appealed the acquittal, and Bainimarama and Sitiveni Gilio, the suspended police commissioner, are back in court this week again because the acting DPP has appealed their acquittals and has asked the High Court, without any hearing, to on the basis of his allegation that the magistrate got it wrong, to record guilty verdicts against them. So,
well, this is just going to cause more unrest and more uncertainty. I mean, the whole replacement of the Director of Public Prosecutions is illegal anyway. What went on there?
Well, not so much that in a sense, and this is very important. Somebody you know, and is a New Zealander, so people listening will be interested. Yeah. A New Zealander called Christopher Pride,
one of the most straight up people I've ever met.
Well, that's why he was appointed in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. He's straight as an arrow, that guy.
Yeah. So he was DPP for the best part of a decade. Yeah. After the election, he was photographed at a public function at the Japanese embassy residence talking to the ousted Attorney General Ayaz Syed Qayyum.
Yeah.
The new Attorney General, Saromi Turanga, ordered the acting Chief Justice, who, by the way, had replaced somebody else in that job of Chief Justice who was accused of misbehaviour. They relieved Christopher Pride of his position. They suspended him on a charge of misbehaviour for being seen in public with a member of the previous government. And 7 months later, his case has not been heard by a tribunal of 3 judges, which the Constitution stipulates must happen. Yeah,
yeah,
and so he's still waiting for justice to be done. I mean, this is the kind of thing that's going on. And so that was one. That's the defiance of the Constitution on one level.
Yes.
But what this new appointment as acting Chief Justice has done is even more serious. He has appointed 2 individuals to senior officers of state whose appointments are in violation of the Constitution. One of these guys, the acting Director of Public Prosecutions, a guy called John Rambuku, was found guilty of professional misconduct by the Legal Services Commission. And on that basis, the Constitution specifically prohibits him from holding that job. Similarly, a Supreme Court judge and Court of Appeal judge by the name of Alipati Kataki, he too was found guilty of professional misconduct by the Legal Services Commission. That didn't stop the current acting Chief Justice appointing those 2 people. Now, this is outrageous in the sense that it is a full-blown assault on the Constitution. Yeah. So what's happening is that the Fiji Law Society, and I'm telling you this, and it's a breaking story in the sense that sort of no one else has got it.
Exclusive to Reality Check Radio at this point.
Absolutely exclusive to your program. The Fiji Law Society, which is the national group of lawyers in private practice is preparing a court challenge to these unlawful appointments of the acting DPP and the Supreme Court judge, which will be an unprecedented showdown. Yeah, it'll pit the legal profession against the judiciary.
Yeah,
and it's come about specifically because the acting Chief Justice appointed by this government has defied the Constitution and refuses to accede to the demands of the nation's lawyers that these illegal appointments be reversed. Now, there's been a whole lot of...
That has huge implications, doesn't it, Graham? Because what most New Zealanders don't understand, and particularly Australians as well wouldn't understand, is that the Constitution that we're talking about here, that's essentially being abrogated by this government. A key part of that Constitution is the provision of the Royal Military of Fiji to guard the Constitution and act as necessary to protect the Constitution.
Absolutely.
And so what we're seeing here is we're actually on the cusp of another coup, aren't we?
Well, look, we are very close to a military intervention. And if I could just refer to that clause in the Constitution that you mentioned, it's Section 1312 of the Constitution. And it says this, right? It shall be the overall responsibility of the Republic of Fiji military forces to ensure at all times the security, defence and well-being of Fiji and all Fijians. Now, that is a very broad statement. Yeah, you can take that whichever way you want. But this year alone, we know that the commander of the RFMF, Major General Raw John A. Colony Y, has warned the government, the new government, at least 3 times in person and in writing, that he expects them to obey the Constitution. The RFMF has always regarded itself as the custodian and guardian of the 2013 Constitution. So, we're entering very dangerous territory here.
Now, there's a few memoranda that have come out of the camp, out of the barracks, isn't there, which have credibility. And you've published several of those. Presumably you've verified that these have come out of senior officers within the army, of the concerns that they have.
I mean, this is the thing, you talk about verification. I have done what I can to verify these, but the most important thing is that nobody at a high level in the RFMF has said, when I've published these things, this is wrong, Grub Sheet, which is the name of my Facebook page, has got this wrong. So, I have published these in good faith, saying they are purported to have emerged from the military. But there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that the commander of the RFMF has told the government that the military expects them to obey the Constitution, and they're not doing it.
Which then leads to the possibility that the military will intercede to restore the Constitution. And if that means removing the elected government, so be it.
Well, there's another stage before that, and that is the possibility of a constitutional coup, in that the government itself is very unstable. There's another piece of news which I can break, that there was a recent direct challenge to the Prime Minister when a deputation led by his deputy, a guy called Manoa Kamikamida, went to him and demanded that he step down. Now, apparently, according to the information I've received, the NFP leader, Birman Prasad, intervened on Rambuka's behalf and told Kamikamida and his supporters that he would take the NFP out of the coalition unless they backed off. But this restiveness in the government, right, this threat to Rambuka's position is very real. Now, this is what I'm about to tell you is also a crucial building block of where we're going with this. And that is that although the Constitution stipulates that you can't have a fresh election in Fiji for 18 months until 18 months after the poll, and we're 11 months out from the 2022 election. A motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister can be called at any time by any MP. Now,
we're sort of at 12 months now, aren't we? So in 6 months' time, that facility becomes available.
Yeah, but there's also the possibility that that in the parliamentary session that begins next week, there could be a motion of no confidence in Rambuka, which would not only bring him down, but bring his cabinet down. And if Sedelpa, as the rumour mill has it, is contemplating doing a deal with Fiji first to bring down the government, this leaves open the possibility of a constitutional coup against Rambuka. Yeah, that it's all kosher. To use the Israeli expression, and that the international community doesn't get upset, and there's a relatively smooth transfer of power.
But you and I both know that, and this is for our listeners' benefit.
Yeah,
Fiji First and Sedelpa have been at war since the first coup by Bainimarama.
Yeah, but there are some intriguing. This is the riddle wrapped in the enigma. Yeah.
It's the emergence of Linda Tambua, isn't it?
No, before that, it's that the leader of Sedelpa, the parliamentary leader of Sedelpa, Viliami Gavoka, is the father-in-law of Ayaz Syed Qayyum, who was Bainimarama's partner all through those years.
Yes.
See, this is Fiji. This is what happens in small countries. All of these kind of filial relationships as well as sort of cronyism. Yeah,
it's cronyism, nepotism, all wrapped up in with intrigue and double dealing and backstabbing and everything else that goes with it, all around the kava bowl.
I mean, it's specific. It's Byzantine behaviour writ large in the Pacific there.
Yeah,
and it's not just Fiji, of course. The same thing happens in PNG, Solomons, and various other places. But we are entering a period of danger because if the military stipulation that the Constitution must be adhered to is being challenged by the acting Chief Justice, the head of the judiciary and the alternative head of state, and he refuses to back down not to the demands of the politicians but the country's lawyers, this increases the pressure and increases the possibility of a military intervention. Now, I don't think this would be like 2006. Yeah, they're not going to take power themselves. They have absolutely no taste for power themselves. So, what they would probably do in consultation with their head of state, who's their commander in chief, they could immediately appoint an interim government comprised of members of the opposition and whoever else is willing to join it, and announce a fresh election date, saying that they had no choice but to act because of the threats to the Constitution, but also because of the instability, and that the country would have another chance to sort of have a say in who governed them, right?
Yeah, I can just imagine
that's the other possibility.
Yeah, I can just imagine the British High Commission and their staff peering over the back fence at Berkeley Crescent to see the comings and goings.
Yeah.
Of course, that's where the RFMF strategic headquarters is, just up the road from the British High Commissioner's residence.
That's right. Yes, yes. No, it's a fascinating time. And see, the thing is, what's changed also is public sentiment. I mean, when the new government came in, there was a wave of goodwill towards them.
Yeah.
Because there was a sort of this was a change. There were fresh faces and what have you, and so many things had happened under the Fiji First government and under Bainimarama and Qayyum that had upset everybody.
Well, I said to Bainimarama and to Qayyum ahead of that election, I said, what you guys forget is that this isn't your second term that you're at the end of.
Yeah,
you've been in power since the point you took power at the point of a gun. It's not 2 terms and people are sick of you. It's a legacy of much longer than that.
Yeah, 16 years.
Yeah, 16 years.
16 years. Like everyone was fed up with them.
Australian governments and New Zealand governments don't last that long, right?
That's right.
They only lasted that long because for a good chunk of that, they were in control of all the guns.
Yeah.
And then they had one election, and then they scraped by in the second election. And they were at the end of that, and of course they forgot, like all politicians, I guess, and started believing their own press releases. And
absolutely,
people were sick of them. And here's the thing, right? Again, for our listeners' benefit, I don't think I explained it properly at the start, but you were deep within the Bainimarama government as an advisor,
I was
speechwriter, doing all sorts of things inside the government, but you fell out with them because...
Well, I didn't fall out with them, funnily enough. I mean...
Well, they fell out with you.
well, no, but that happened after I'd left, yeah?
Yes.
And if I could just explain, this needs a little bit of context. Just give me 30 seconds. Okay, so the thing was that having been born in Fiji and being brought up with the whole multiracial ideal, it was the only way forward for Fiji to be a success as a nation.
Yep.
When Bainimarama staged his coup in 2006 and the program was to level the playing field, I supported that, and I publicly supported that in articles that I wrote. And so in 2012, out of the blue, I got approached by a Washington PR company by the name of Corvus, asking me whether I was interested in going back to Fiji to work on their account for the Fijian government. And of course, at the time, I mean, I was fronting a TV program and various other things, but it was so appealing to me to actually have the ability to sort of make a difference in the country of my birth, as I'm sure you understand.
I took 100%, up completely.
And I took up this thing, and I was a true believer in that. And in fact, I supported them all through 2014. Frank Bainimarama didn't want to have the election. He wanted to have a referendum on whether to have an election. This is privately. And I said to him, Prime Minister, you can't do that. You promised the world that you're going to have an election, and you've got to have it, and we'll help you to win it. Yeah, which of course we did, and what have you. And so this all went on quite well. The second election that they had in 2018 was different. By this time, I'd started to get a bit disenchanted with them. But I still left on very good terms, and they thanked me for my service. And of course, I went from there to work on Fiji's global climate campaign.
Yes.
But of course, in the end, it just became untenable. So I did begin to criticize them at first, softly, and then with a big stick. And of course, I'm hated by both sides in Fiji because not only by Fiji First, who they blame me for sort of their defeat in 2022, but also by this government.
I didn't know you were that powerful, Graham.
Look, this is the thing, you see, and this is important for people to realise. The mainstream media in Fiji was repressed with draconian laws by Bainimarama and Kayum. But having been freed by the new coalition government, they're still, not telling people what's actually going on in the country. And this is the service that I'm providing for people.
Well, they're like Pavlov's dogs, aren't they? They've been cowed by their treatment by successive governments over the years, that they've lost the ability to question. And I saw that when I went up there in 2014 for the first election. As a New Zealand journalist, got accreditation, went to a whole lot of meetings, particularly at the Fiji Elections Office with Mohammed Saneem, and nobody would ask him any questions. And there was a room full of, there'd be 20, 30 journalists in there, and the only person asking him questions was me. And I got taken aside by somebody who said, Cam, you need to dial it back a bit. We don't want these people We don't want these people learning to ask questions.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, how is Fiji ever going to become a fully democratic nation if their journalists aren't even trained to hold the powerful to account?
Well, and there's another thing that's also part of this whole small nation thing. The media proprietors in Fiji, who employ these people, of course, want to keep themselves sweet with the government in power. The powers that be, the government of the day. And so, there is nothing like the scrutiny that politicians get subjected to routinely in New Zealand and Australia, which is a great shame. But this is where I decided to come in. I mean, nobody pays me. I'm retired, and I sort of do this in my spare time. But of course, I break stories routinely that are not in the Fijian media at all. Yeah, and I mean, this went back to the time of Bainimarama and Kayum, in that nobody was prepared to tell the country that both of them had left for cardiac transplant operations overseas. Yeah, it was just a sort of national secret, and yet that was, I sort of told everybody about that, for instance. And none of this stuff I'm telling you about the Fiji Law Society court challenge to the unlawful appointments of the acting DPP and the judge, the recent direct challenge to the Prime Minister by his own deputy. Neither of those stories are in the Fijian media. I mean, it's a culture in which they take the press release, ask a couple of perfunctory questions, and the government controls the narrative, which is a great shame.
Well, the government controlled the narrative quite easily under Bainimarama when they basically took away the advertising from one particular media outlet and gave it all to another one.
Exactly.
And they starved them of revenue and all those things. Now, personally, that's what I'm suggesting that the New Zealand government does with our complicit media that have taken millions of dollars of bribes from the government here, is take away their money and make them play on an even playing field. But I'm not suggesting it should go from one organisation to another, like what happened in Fiji, which was a diabolical scheme that slanted the resources.
Well, this is why I'm so down on these guys, having promised to be different, having promised change, having promised to not be like their predecessors. They're exactly like their predecessors. And on the issue of belonging, of people of ethnicity and different religions belonging, they are much worse than Fiji First. I can't support that under any circumstances, and I don't imagine you doing so either, because as you and I are both part of a minority in Fiji, the white minority. And this fervent ethno-nationalism, indigenous supremacy or whatever, is the antithesis of nation building. You know what I mean?
Well, it's never worked anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world that embarks on ethno-nationalism ends in tears at the least, bloodshed at the worst. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that in Fiji. I don't want to see the country of my birth brought to its knees with ethnic violence. I don't want to see that. I want to see Fiji a strong, vibrant democracy that can use its tourism to spread the word around the rest of the Pacific that this is the way you do things. This is the way you conduct yourself.
Well, precisely. You and I have exactly the same agenda in relation to that.
Yeah,
because one of the worst things, Cam, is that all of this is triggering another exodus from Fiji of the best and brightest, The government's suddenly in a panic about the brain drain, We know there are skill shortages in Australia and New Zealand that are being filled by people from the region, including Fiji. Yeah. And, of course, why wouldn't they come to New Zealand and Australia if the majority population there is saying, we don't want you, you don't belong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the level of vituperation, particularly on social media, is acute, I mean, I get called the effing white, C word, without any shame on the part of those people who do that.
No, I know.
In Australia, there's laws against it. I don't know about New Zealand.
Oh, no, you can't do that in New Zealand either. But what I've found astonishing is that level of animosity that there is. And you're right. I mean, it's not like where we had land confiscations in New Zealand that have led to decades worth of treaty settlements, or the complete ignoring of a group of people who happened to live in Australia for tens of thousands of years before Abel Tasman and James Cook sailed over the horizon and spied a bit of land. Just appalling behaviour that happened in the 1700s, 1800s, early part of the 20th century. There's been none of that in Fiji. As you say, 94% of the land is controlled by Itaukai. They've always had control of the land. Control of the land should mean control of the resources.
Well, there is this sort of fortress mentality, and I mean, I can understand it. We saw it in South Africa, didn't we, in the 70s with the Afrikaans? The sort of go to the lager mentality. Defend our culture at all costs, and I think that's a feature of these smaller populations around the world. But you're absolutely right. There are no examples of mono-ethnic nations which have expelled their minorities, and the whole of East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, whatever. There's multiple examples when you expel, those minorities, particularly if they're educated and particularly if they're business-minded, etc., it degrades your national capability. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
And then when you degrade the national capability and your economy suffers as a result, you end up with and the resulting instability that comes from that. And, of course, having multiple coups or even having the army step in, even if it's to enforce new elections, it drives tourists away. And if you don't have tourists in Fiji, then you're left with being, like you described, a beggar nation, where you're relying on remittances or the work from the United Nations, and that's about it. Because if tourism stops to Fiji, there's a whole lot of people that are reliant on that. Now, what people don't realize is when a coup happens, these sorts of things occur. What happens to the Fijian or the Itaukai Fijians is they go back to the village. The people who suffer are actually the Indian population, because they're the ones who are in these jobs that are reliant on tourism and things like that.
Well, look, can I just make this point? I don't think that even if there is another military intervention in Fiji, as long as it's non-violent, and as long as there's an election date set and a way forward, I don't think it's going to make any difference to the tourist traffic. Can I just say this? Fiji is absolutely booked out for the next couple of years, according to media reports, in the Fijian media. The post-COVID travel boom, which is global, as you know, has resulted in Aussies and Kiwis going to Fiji in record numbers. It's just shy of 1 million a year for the first time. And in fact, global bankers are saying that Fiji has hit peak capacity in relation to the tourism industry. And unless they produce another 5,000 hotels in the next few years, they're going to have to turn people away. And the economic growth that they're expecting to come from the increased number of tourists visiting the country won't be realized, because they just won't have the capacity to deal with that. So, and the other thing that I don't need to explain to you is that coups have traditionally happened around Suva, which is on the other side of Viti Levu, and the west of Fiji, the western part of Viti Levu, which is where the main tourism resorts are, have not really ever been affected by any of the previous coups. So I don't think there's any reason for people to suddenly start saying, "Oh, well, we can't go to Fiji for Christmas, Dad, because there's going to be a coup there."
Well, you and I both know that, right? But there are a group of people who won't go, because when you've got a coup, what happens is governments around the world issue do not travel advices. As soon as you get a do not travel advice, you don't have travel insurance and those sorts of things. Now,
well, that's true. There is a risk.
For me, though, it doesn't do anything, right? Because, well, it's where I was born. I'd go to Fiji anyway, and I know the security situation in a coup means it's a whole lot better. Not that it's particularly bad in any case. I mean, there's parts of Auckland that are far worse than Suva, and even in the worst parts of Suva. And I'm sure there's places in Sydney that you could say you just don't go there.
Well,
but,
yes.
But almost anywhere in Fiji, in Suva, you're happy to go to. It's not a problem.
There has been, though, an increase in crime and a lot of concern of ordinary members of the community about the law and order situation. And part of that is because there's now a huge drug problem in Fiji. Yeah, and it's not just marijuana growing there.
No, it's methamphetamine.
Methamphetamine trade is huge. And as you know, some of that's been linked to New Zealand. So this is, that's fueling a law and order problem. But my point is that if you have role models in government at the level of the Minister for Education, who almost killed his ex-wife and the Prime Minister's daughter, what sort of message is that sending to the rest of the population about standards?
Well, I mean, that's the issue, isn't it? And when you've got the illegal behaviour, the nepotism, the cronyism going on, it leads to the general impression that things are not all well in Fiji, that there are serious issues, which then leads to speculation that perhaps the military will step in, and that's when people don't want to invest. If you want to build a business in Fiji, you look at all those sort of geopolitical situations, you think, well, shit, is this a place where I want to put $2 million or $5 million or $10 million? Or even more if you're going to build a resort when there's instability? You think,
well, exactly. This is
maybe I won't.
And the instability continues. I mean, this is the crazy thing about all of this. All this government has to do is to operate within the parameters of the 2013 Constitution, which they may not have agreed with, but they have actually sworn on the Bible to defend, because it's it's part of the oath of office of every single public official from the president down, including all of the MPs who are now saying the Constitution's rubbish and they don't like it.
And all the soldiers.
Why did you swear on the Bible? You know, and as you know, they're sort of very fundamentalist Christians. Why did you swear on the Bible to uphold a document that you don't believe is valid?
Yeah. That's the thing, isn't it? Because even all the soldiers have sworn to uphold the Constitution.
Yes, so, absolutely.
You know, there will come a point where the RFMF will have to do something. I don't know.
I think we're rapidly approaching that. Yeah. And that's why this clash between the country's lawyers and the judiciary is potentially the watershed moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when it gets to that stage, it's not politicians going head to head and the military saying, well, look, you guys have got to work this out. It's the country's lawyers saying the judiciary are actually breaking the supreme law. That's very dangerous.
Well, because you're losing one of those arms of a modern democracy where the judiciary is separated from the politicians, which is separated from the military.
Well, it's my view that the judiciary is no longer in Fiji, is no longer independent, and takes its instructions from the government of the day, and that is a very serious situation.
Well, as you said, that's a constitutional coup.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm I've got to be careful here. There are very good judges, and I'm not saying the judiciary as a whole is complicit in all of this, but there is one individual, the acting Chief Justice, who is defying the Constitution. He's about to go head-to-head with the Fiji Law Society in relation to all of that. And his conduct since this issue was raised, where the Fiji Law Society said you need to rescind these illegal appointments, has been extraordinary. I mean, last week there was an induction of new lawyers, and in his speech, the acting Chief Justice castigated the president of the Fiji Law Society in public. So they're asking for it.
They are asking for it, but you know, the thing is, Graham, is that every time we see this, I just sit there and die a little bit inside that the country of my birth can't get its act together, and this is not difficult stuff, But this is why we commentate on these things. This is why we write about these things, because we've got a voice. And if nobody in Fiji will use their voice, then we need to.
Well, precisely. And look, the agenda here is the integrity of the institutions of state. If the if people who occupy the principal institutions of state do their jobs and adhere to the rule of law, there is no reason for any of these places to have these difficulties. Yeah, but it's essentially a group of individuals who think that the law doesn't apply to them, that they're above the law, and that they can take it upon themselves to either violate it or change it.
And we know what happens in Fiji if you try and do that.
Well, yes, unfortunately.
And everything that I've seen about the head of the RFMF tells me that this is a guy that has integrity. All his public statements are about adhering to the Constitution. You would be a stupid person to ignore that in Fiji.
Well, the thing is, Raw John Eyre Colony Y is a person of immense integrity. Yeah, he's from a chiefly family. He is universally respected, and he is bending over backwards to accommodate this behaviour. That's the problem. Yeah, he's in a very insidious position now because his officers around him perceive that he has been weak in standing up for this and are pressuring him to intervene. Now, obviously under those circumstances, if he won't do it,
they will.
The history, exactly, and the history of coups in all of these countries is that it's a junior officer who does it. And of course, in 1987, it was Sitiveni Rambuka who carried out the coup in Fiji, while the head of the RFMF, Ratuapeli Nailatikau, who's just the immediate, one of the recent presidents of the country, was out of the country. And wouldn't this be the irony of ironies, Cam? Yeah. If 36 years after he carried out the two coups in Fiji in 1987, Sitiveni Rambuka was removed at gunpoint himself.
Well, I'm sitting here from afar looking at it, and I'm reading what you're writing, and I'm picking up what my friends are saying inside Fiji, and they're all saying the same thing. This feels like we're heading towards an intervention. Let's not use the word coup, but an intervention from the RFMF.
Yeah, I don't like using the coup word, but, a constitutional coup is that it's worked out within the Constitution, but the government falls. A coup is, you'll leave your offices now, or we'll
shoot you.
Force, or no, they never do that.
They never do that, no.
They being prodded by an automatic weapon is usually enough to get you out of your seat.
Well, usually
even someone like you can.
Usually just a sharp bayonet will do that, but yeah, exactly. But the only time there's been actually shooting is when Spate was involved, and that's why I made the comment about him. I'm not sure he's all there together in his head, because
he was a megalomaniac, and he paid a terrible price, and yet this government wants to free him. This is a guy who was sentenced to death. It was commuted to life imprisonment. When you're sentenced to death, somebody pronounces that you will hang until dead, and that's subsequently commuted. There is no mechanism for you to be released. It's for the term of your natural life, right?
Exactly.
But again, these people think that an absolute convention like that is something that they don't have to take any notice of.
I mean, he was out on an island somewhere, but he's now, residing in Mboro prison.
Yeah, just outside Suva.
Just outside Suva, but it's not a pleasant place as you drive past it. You can see it's not a pleasant place, but it's certainly better than the old Suva prison in Lamy.
Yeah. No, it's not a pleasant place. I mean, I know people who've done time in there, and you're in a small cell with somebody else, and it's a bucket.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
But
not the kind of place you and I would enjoy particularly.
No, we wouldn't. Look, I'm sure we're going to have to talk to you again shortly as things develop. But let's just stay in touch. And
yes, mate.
It's been a real pleasure talking to you today about Fiji and catching up with our joint homeland, really.
Yes.
And
thank you, Cam.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been a real pleasure. Graham has a deep love of the country of his birth, just like me. He's also connected into every aspect of Fijian political life. We used to spend hours over a fair few gins in Suva discussing everything about the country of our birth. It's disappointing to see and hear what is going on up there. But if anybody knows, Graham knows. Don't forget to send comments on Graham's interview to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
RCR is on a mission to revive honest media, and now you too can be an integral part of it by joining the RCR Foundation Members Club. Receive exclusive benefits only available to club members, including your own backstage pass to join the hosts for interactive behind-the-scenes discussions, along with our all-new daily curated news summary, RCR Bites, that's delivered to your email box every morning, keeping you on the pulse of the news that matters in just a few minutes per day. To find out more, visit realitycheck.radio/members to see how you can join the mission that's making a difference.
Our text machine is now live. Send us your thoughts by texting your message to 2057. That's 2057. So get in touch with us now.
Right, it's time for my favourite part of the show, the mailbag, where you give me your feedback, brickbats, curses, hate mail, and, of course, some of you like me as well. So I got some general feedback here from Arlene. I've never been interested in politics, so I've really appreciated Cam Slater, especially. He's so informative. Oh, thanks, Arlene. Now, about my rant about the New Zealand media, Mike from Foxton. Bless Mike. Cam, this is the seriously funniest report I've ever heard about reporters. It's so good you should do this for a job. Oh, you do. And guess what? You seem to do it very well. Keep up the awesome work. And Michelle says, Cam, I am disgusted with the rubbish that comes from legacy media. If New Zealand First does get the broadcasting portfolio, I will make the popcorn go with that show. LOL. Now, about my John Banks interview. Again, Mike from Foxton. Hi again, Cam. Just listening to you with John Banks. Next time you see him, say hi from me. John used to call into my dairy in Waipu on his way to Auckland in the early 80s and buy a vanilla ice cream. Always only a single scoop, but a large single scoop. And we would often chat when he had time. Always thought he was a decent type and was no mug. Still loving the crunch. It's now my go-to political must-listen-to radio show. Anonymous says, wow, I just love Banksy. He deserves a big, loud applause. Such common sense talk. Thank you, RCR. Janet says, loved listening to Cam and John Banks. It's given me a fresh confidence in politicians and much respect for Johnny's emotional intelligence, his work ethic, and humility. Long may he keep on keeping on. Anonymous writes, Banksy is 100% correct. New Zealand needs a lot of change. It needs to reverse all of Labour's bad policies, cancel woke, defund the media, and reconsider the entire school curriculum since it is contaminated with gender ideology. Trans people should have their own charter school. Every area of New Zealand life should be scrutinised to see if it's righteous. Sue writes in and says, great interview with John Banks. Thank you. I've read Paul Goldsmith's excellent biography of John and know about his background. A much underrated man and politician. He has true compassion and insight into New Zealand society and where it needs to go. It would be good to hear more from him as the new government progresses. And we get Simon says, FYI, Cam, I just texted this truth to News Talk ZNB whilst listening to you and Banksy as follows. I listen to Truth on RCR. John Banks is on with Cam Slater, truthing out you lying legacy media sycophants that suck up to the government and drug companies. Truth really hurts on you and you deserve all the shit back that you have dished out, all of you. Thanks for the great show. And Clarissa writes, Cam, I just listened to your interview with John Banks. What a wonderfully wise and principled man. Loved his straight-up honesty in everything he had to say. Please have him on again. Keep up the great work. Athena writes, Hi, Cam, I loved your talk with Banksy. He made some great points. And yes, New Zealanders need to stand up, take accountability for their life and health, and be prepared to put their nose to the grindstone as we all do our bit to turn this around. And Tony adds, what a great Sunday morning listening to RCR with John Banks and Cam Slater. Such an entertaining and educational talk by both. And John Banks still riding a powerful motorbike, just like his character. And how we need people like both to inspire and wake us up to obtain better things in life. I went to a poet meeting in Titirangi yesterday and found another interesting group quietly getting on with things. Brilliant. And Joanne says, Hi, Cam, I must say that interview you had with John Banks on the 9th of November was one of the best interviews I've heard. Bang on the money, and while I don't agree with a couple of things he said, it was a fab interview, and I've been sharing it to friend and family alike. Keep up the good work. And off Facebook, Lindley says, after his knockdown last week on men being sissies, Cam had a wobbly moment in this interview. Brought a tear to my eye. John Banks certainly is an amazing soul and just another who is totally misrepresented by the MSM. Wonderful interview, Cam. Jill says on Facebook as well, excellent interview. Thank you, RCR. And Linda adds on Facebook, a great interview. And now to my interview with Casey Costello. Yvonne says, hello, I listened to your interview with Casey Costello. In it, Cam talked a lot about a two-horse race between Casey and Andrew, which I found quite disappointing. There are actually lots of other people standing in the electorate, and I'd love to hear from them, particularly Alfred Naro from the New Zealand Party. Look forward to hearing some of these other voices. Well, Yvonne, Alfred has been invited on to RCR for a post-election review, and Tane knows all about that. I've got a bit of a long one here from Ruth from Christchurch. I really appreciate the presenters and interviews that RCR does. I used to listen to Radio New Zealand's national program, but sometime in 2020 I said enough is enough. I got sick of the slanted narrative and obfuscation, and I've never gone back. We quit watching TV over 10 years ago when our children were small and never went back, although our youngest is in his teens now. I switched to the concert program because the C word was virtually never mentioned. Then RCR started up, and I listen most days and catch the replays. What a breath of fresh air. I particularly like a political agenda and all things related to politics. I listened to Cam talking to John Banks and Casey Costello while on my morning walk today, and I just have to say how much I enjoyed and appreciate the people they are. Cam, you've been on my radar for a long time as your name has cropped up a lot over the last 15 or so years, especially after that scurrilous piece of toilet paper written by Nikki Hager. Bad news can end up being good publicity for the good guys. I was so heartened to know you're in the camp of truth and reality along with Peter, Rodney, Lindsay and Paul, names I'd heard of and discourse I'd enjoyed. Please keep up the good work, every single one of you. Jaspreet, Marie, Natalie, Don. My apologies to anyone I've missed out. Jan writes about the Cam's buddies. Hi, Cam. All your buddies were great. I agree with all of them. Keep up the great work. God bless them and all on RCR. And Sarah adds about my interview with Greg Sayers. I loved hearing Cam's interview with Greg Sayers. He is one of my local councillors, but I would never have seen that side of him without your interview. So thanks. He'll be getting my vote again next time. Love what you do. Thank you so much. And that's the mailbag for this week.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Right, that's it for The Crunch this week. I'm really enjoying talking with Gary Moller and especially excited about possibly tracking down the final piece of my stroke puzzle. We'll keep you informed on progress on that front and how we go about trying to reverse that damage. My good mate Graham Davis has provided us with an exciting scoop that the Fiji government is about to get sued by the Fiji Law Society. And this could precipitate a constitutional coup in Fiji that may unseat Sitiveni Rabuka as Prime Minister. Worse, it could cause an actual coup where the RFMF steps in to protect the Constitution. And if anyone knows, Graham knows. We'll keep an eye out for developments. Hopefully we won't see another coup, but hey, it's Fiji, and that's always on the cards. Still no answer from Andrew Bailey about appearing on the show. He's just a week away from the by-election, and it seems a rather strange behaviour to shun interviews. Meanwhile, I see other media have woken up to just who Casey Costello is, and they've done their own interviews with her. But remember, you heard all about her here, first on The Crunch and Reality Check Radio. And we here at Reality Check Radio are here to give you all sides of any story or issue, to discuss the meaty issues and thrash them out. And it's a job we all love doing. And sometimes we even get an exclusive and breaking story like that which Graham Davis provided. If you're using the RCR app, and you really should be, you can easily get all our replays as well as listen live. And a big thanks for the team that helps put together the show and make it all work. It's been a real pleasure having you all back again this week. I'm loving all your feedback and really enjoying talking to so many people sharing their thoughts on politics, life, and everything in between. So a big shout out to all of you, and thank you for listening and having faith in me as we continue to explore what I think is the beautiful game of politics. Don't forget, email suggestions to inbox@realitycheck.radio for people for me to interview, and let's make this show the best political show in New Zealand. Stay tuned for a breakfast show repeat coming up next with features including Money Talks with my buddy Fazan Iranyi and Perigo's Perspective with the one and only Lindsay Perigo. Looking forward to having you join me again next Thursday at 4 p.m. for The Crunch with Cam Slater.
You've been listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater. Remember, you can check out the replays for today's show on our website at www.realitycheck.radio/replays. Tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. for more with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.